Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a city that carries the scent of coal smoke mixed with lavender soap. A place where every breath you take feels deliberate. And it's not just because of the crisp air. You're standing in a cramped Victorian bedroom as twilight presses against the glass, staring at your reflection flickering in a tarnished mirror. Your garments are laid out like commandments folded precisely on a chair. You're not going to believe this. Even the act of breathing is about to turn into theatre. Before taking a single step into polite society, before uttering a single word, your body needs to be shaped to match the world's vision of womanhood. Alright, before you settle in too much, go on and hit that like button and subscribe. But only if it feels right to you. And if you're tuning in from somewhere distant, share your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. Meanwhile, stick around as the room fills with lamp glow and anticipation. Lower those lights, get that fan spinning for some ambient sound, and let's ease into tonight's little journey. The door swings open gently and someone enters, your maid or your mother or your aunt, someone who's performed this ceremony 1,000 times. She takes the corset down from where it hangs. It doesn't look menacing. It looks lovely. Soft satin, intricate needlework, steel busk concealed like a hidden backbone. But once it encircles you, lovely transforms into formidable. She pulls the strings. Your ribcage agrees at first, then resists, then gives in. Each pull claims a narrow strip of oxygen. Your waist shrinks an inch, then another, as though frightened. You try to keep your expression neutral. A proper woman must never appear distressed. Don't forget that. You breathe in. The air catches midway like a bird striking glass. Your chest lifts in small, measured movements. That's what they call refined breathing. Not the deep belly kind you were born knowing, but the courteous kind that never dares to expand. Somewhere a man has declared this attractive. Somewhere a measurement has been whispered. 18 inches, 16 if you're daring, like a commandment you're supposed to follow. Beyond these walls, carriage wheels rumble across stone. Somewhere a woman collapses. That's expected too. In fact, completely fashionable. You've been told that during one sweltering London summer, physicians treated fainting episodes as routinely as headaches, and stores actually advertised smelling salts for swooning ladies as if they were candy. There's a saying that if you drop a handkerchief among a group of women, you'll hear a dozen bodies collapse. You chuckle when you initially hear it. Eventually, you don't. Your inner organs have discovered new positions. Your lungs shift upward. Your liver bargains for room. You're not supposed to understand that compressing ribs can damage delicate tissue, or that some women's spines slowly curve trying to satisfy a shape. You're definitely not supposed to understand that one prominent medical text quietly cautioned that extreme lacing could distort the ribcage permanently. But cautions are dull. Grace isn't. Now you settle down carefully because the corset punishes careless movements with a sudden sharp jab. You drink tea like it's a challenge. Too much, and sickness emerges. Giggle too freely, and the room spins. Move quickly and your sight sparkles with lights. A girl once attempted to scale a fence in a corset and became trapped like a cat in a basket, legs dangling, while dignity perished. That tale becomes popular at gatherings. Nobody mentions the suffering. There's an odd reassurance in mastering the steps, in understanding when to breathe, when to smile, when to remain silent. It renders the world predictable. But occasionally, late at night, when you release the strings and your body floods back into itself with a timid ache, you place a hand against your ribs and question what liberation would feel like if it began in your lungs. The mirror captures your face once more. It appears correct. Society accepts it. You don't. Not completely. And that tiny dissatisfaction, hardly louder than your breath, will somehow keep expanding. You walk outside into the grey-blue stillness of a Victorian dawn. Your breath now barely detectable under the corset's gentle tyranny. The mist wraps around your ankles like a knowing feline, and your boots tap against the cobblestones in precise, ladylike rhythm. Everything about you has been tightened, folded, pressed, or expanded into obedience. But what they cannot compress is the part of you that observes. You observe how men march while you drift. Their jackets flutter, yours must hug. Their pockets overflow with instruments, tobacco, notebooks. Yours are ornamental flaps sewn closed. If you need to transport anything, you're permitted a handbag the size of a change purse. You grip it delicately, like embarrassment, because women shouldn't possess things. They should possess appearances. From a distance, you appear poised, restrained, even admired. But your thoughts dart like rodents beneath the corset's edge. How many other women are restricting their breath right now? Is the widow near the bakery still cinching her waist, even though she no longer ventures out except for coal? Did that young girl at church who coughed all winter, did anyone loosen her garments? At night, you suspect they didn't. A carriage passes by, and from inside, a well-dressed woman gives the driver a cool nod. You identify that type of refinement. She probably possesses 3 corsets, one for daytime, one for evening, and one for morning. You heard once that Queen Victoria herself preferred a cord-quilted design, with steel reinforcements. Steel in a garment worn against flesh. But not all women wore them for fashion's sake. Some wore corsets, simply because their bodies had been moulded by them since youth. Their bones, quite literally, had nowhere else to develop. There's even an antique corset locked away in a small-town museum that measures barely 13 inches at the waist. Local legend suggests it belonged to a preacher's daughter who only removed it to bathe. Her spine now sits in a glass case nearby, twisted, faithful to the shape it was commanded to serve you. Try not to dwell on bones. A boy speeds past on a bicycle, laughing, coat billowing like rebellion. You long for that freedom. But cycling in a corset? Not unless you want fractured ribs and a scandal. That's why the bloomer movement, brief and breathless, sparked such fury. Women wearing trousers to ride bikes, the outrage. You remember how the newspapers labelled them unnatural and threatening, as if fabric between your legs somehow endangered the empire. Back at home, your sister's getting dressed. She's younger, bolder, she tightens her laces alone, teeth clenched, eyes fixed on the mirror. She doesn't want assistance. She wants authority. She wants the world to accept she's already a lady. When the cord slips and cuts into her palm, she doesn't wince. You pass her the hairbrush, and for a moment neither of you speaks. The silence hangs like an inquiry. Neither of you dares ask. What if we refused? What if you didn't lace, didn't smile, didn't diminish? But then the housekeeper knocks and the world closes in again. The corset isn't just fabric and steel, it's guidance. Sit like this, laugh like that. Stay silent, don't occupy space. It resonates beneath every gesture, every decision. You bear it even when it's not on your body. Later, as you lie flat in bed, lungs hurting with each too shallow breath, you picture a version of yourself running, truly running, without anything bound around your ribs, not proper, not respectable, but genuine. And the thought, strange and sudden, feels almost like a complete breath. You awaken before sunrise, your body still sore from yesterday's struggle with buckles and bone stays. But today presents a different challenge, one that has nothing to do with breath or waistlines and everything to do with legs, because today you're heading out not for a walk, not to church, but to attempt something bold, something modern, something with wheels. Your friend Alice has a new bicycle. She mentions it to you like a secret scandal, as if she's just obtained a smuggled pamphlet or a forbidden book. A bicycle, she says, with gleaming metal gears and thick rubber tyres. It arrived in a crate last Tuesday. Her brother helped her unpack it, but her mother won't even glance at the thing. It's sitting in the garden shed like a sin waiting to happen. You visit after tea. The shed smells of grease and dirt, and the bicycle leans against a wall like it understands it doesn't belong here. You run your hand over the handlebars, cold and unfamiliar. It resembles nothing like the illustration you saw in a ladies' magazine, the one with the dainty tricycle and the overdressed woman perched rigidly atop. This machine is sleek, unapologetic, but here's the issue. You can't ride it in a bustle and absolutely not in petticoats. I brought these, Alice says, opening a bag. Out tumble bloomers, honest to goodness. Loose-legged, ankle-gathered trousers, the kind that set newspaper editors raging and had preachers thundering from pulpits in 1851. You stare at them as if they might detonate. Try them, she insists, and you do. Behind the shed, heart pounding, fingers fumbling with buttons. The fabric is coarser than you expected, masculine, liberating. You step out, half expecting the sky to split open in fury. It doesn't. Just a breeze ruffling the hem like approval. You mount the bicycle with all the grace of a newborn deer. Your knees wobble. Your skirt would have tangled by now, but the bloomers hold strong. You press forward, hesitant at first, then braver, and then momentum. The garden fence blurs. Wind sings past your ears. You're moving faster than propriety ever permitted. Alice cheers behind you. For a few glorious seconds, you're both soaring. No corset, no chaperone, no restrictions. Just two women in trousers tearing up the morning mist. Then you spot him, a man on the corner, newspaper under his arm, mouth frozen, mid-scowl. He's watching you the way one might watch a runaway pig in the town square. Horrified, bewildered, a little entertained, you slow. The bike wobbles, your face burns. "That's improper," he shouts, as if God himself has granted him authority. "I know," you yell back, breathless and grinning. "And that's the issue, isn't it?" You push on. A child claps. A shopgirl stares. An older woman, bonnet askew, groceries in hand, nods ever so slightly before turning away. Not everyone approves, but not everyone protests either. Later, you and Alice collapse in the grass behind the shed, gasping and muddy. She looks at you sideways. "I think we startled the vicar's wife." "Good," you say. You don't tell your mother, you definitely don't tell your aunt. But that night, you fold the bloomers and hide them under your bed like contraband. You can't wear them in public, not yet, but they're waiting. Because it turns out freedom doesn't just live in the lungs. Sometimes it begins in the thighs. The next morning, the bloomers remain under your bed, folded like a promise you're not quite ready to honour. You step into your usual skirts, fasten your usual buttons, and pretend, at least for now, to forget what the wind felt like on your legs. But something changed. You notice things now, like how stairs are more difficult in a tight skirt, how sitting is a calculation, how crossing a busy street becomes a game of guessing. Can I lift my hem without lifting too much? You pass the tailor's shop and pause in front of the display window. There, on a headless mannequin, hangs a pair of wool trousers with sharp pleats and a row of silver buttons. The sign beneath them reads, "Gentleman's Riding Suit. Autumn." Wait. You try to imagine a version of your life where you could request to try them on, where no one would raise an eyebrow, where no one would whisper. But this is 1887, not a dream. And in this world, women don't wear trousers. Not to school, not to work, certainly not to Parliament. Not that you're permitted there either. The newspapers are filled with warnings. Trousers will unsex women. Bicycles will make you infertile. Horseback riding astride is unnatural. There's a pamphlet circulating among housewives. The hidden dangers of the rational dress movement that claims loose clothing invites loose morals. You wonder if anyone writing these articles has ever tried to run for the postman in a crinoline. But the logic isn't about safety. It never was. It's about containment, control. Skirts make you slow, trousers would make you fast, and fast women, in every sense, are dangerous. You're reminded of the story Alice told about a woman in New York who got arrested just for wearing trousers in public. They claimed it was fraud, said she was impersonating a man, but she was just walking to work. just walking, as if movement itself were a deception. And then there's the case of Dr. James Barry, or rather Margaret, a woman who lived her entire life disguised as a man so she could practice medicine in the British Army, performed surgeries, saved lives, reached the rank of Inspector General, and when she died, scandal, shock. How dare a woman accomplish so much under their very noses? You begin to think about clothing less as fashion and more like permission. If trousers can transport a man to university, to office, to courtroom, then perhaps what you wear really is a type of passport, and yours has borders drawn in lace. Back at home, your mother is mending your petticoat. She shakes her head. Nothing endures, she mutters. She means the stitching. But you hear something else. Later that week, the newspaper prints a letter to the editor from an anonymous gentleman raging against the sight of women parading around in bloomers. He claims it threatens civilization. You clip it out and keep it, not because you agree, but because the fury means they're frightened. And frightened men write letters. Brave women write history. On Sundays, you and Alice still walk past the garden shed. Sometimes you peek in, sometimes you just touch the handlebars. But every time you walk a little taller, because even though the world insists that pants are not for you, your legs remember what it felt like to run without rules. You haven't worn them again yet. But that's the thing about forbidden clothing. It's patient. It waits in the shadows, and it never forgets your size. The courthouse smells of ink and stale air. You're not even permitted in most of it, just the public gallery. If you sit quietly and don't speak, you perch beside your aunt on the worn bench, gloves neatly folded, spine rigid. Below, the drama unfolds. Lawyers bellow, clerks scurry. A man on trial for something or other pounds his fist. The judge interrupts with a bark. Everything echoes. You're mesmerised not by the case, but by the sheer volume of male voices. In one space, there isn't a single woman on the floor. You'd heard it before, of course, that women aren't permitted to speak in court. Not as barristers, not as witnesses in certain kinds of cases, and definitely not as jurors. Women are considered too emotional, too delicate, too easily influenced. That's the line. But witnessing it happen live makes your jaw tense. You look around. The few women present sit like background decorations. Sisters, mothers, wives. Their hands twist handkerchiefs. Their mouths stay closed. A young woman in the back, not much older than you, lets out a gasp when the verdict is announced. Heads swivel. She's escorted out moments later for disrupting the court. The man beside you scoffs. Shouldn't be here anyway, he mutters. All that fainting and weeping leave law to men. You want to ask him how many men faint when they lose custody of their child or when their husband locks them in a room for days. But your mouth stays shut. You're still learning where silence is required. And then you remember the story Alice told you about Caroline Norton. She was a writer, beautiful and brilliant, who left her abusive husband only to discover that she had no legal identity of her own. He sued her friends, took her children, accused her of adultery with the Prime Minister, and she couldn't even testify in her own defence. Her words weren't admissible. She was a woman. You clutch your gloves tighter. Caroline wasn't the only one. Under coverture laws, a married woman's legal existence is absorbed by her husband. She can't enter a contract, she can't sue, she can't own property. In the eyes of the court, she is nobody. You leave the courthouse that day with a sharp taste of iron in your mouth, a hunger almost not just for justice, but for a voice, your own. That afternoon, while your cousin rambles about train schedules and your uncle reads aloud from the newspaper, you begin to wonder what it would require to step into that courtroom, not as a spectator but as a participant. You imagine standing where the barrister stood, robes flowing, voice firm. And the strangest thing, you don't laugh at the thought, you don't dismiss it, you just store it away. That evening you borrow a legal textbook from the library. It's heavy and smells of dust. The librarian raises an eyebrow when you request it. "Studying for your husband," he jokes. You smile politely, say nothing. But when you get home, you crack it open and begin to read. The language is dense, hostile even. It's not written for you, but you read anyway. Not because you'll be tested, but because one day you want to be heard. And that means learning their words, their weapons, their walls. You sit by the fire that evening, the legal textbook open on your lap, pretending to knit while your eyes scan the pages. Every paragraph seems constructed like a fortress, thick with Latin, lined with precedent, bristling with clauses designed to keep you out. Not just you, of course. Any woman, any wife, any mother who might dare to believe that her suffering deserves to be spoken aloud in a court of law. The injustice isn't new, but now you can see its architecture. You flip to the section on property law. It's the same old rule. Once a woman marries, her possessions, inheritance, income, even the furniture she brought into the house become her husband's. If she earns a wage, it legally belongs to him. If she inherits a house, she may live in it, but only if he allows. And if she objects, she has no legal recourse unless he beats her with a stick thicker than his thumb. That's not folklore, that's precedent. Outside, rain taps against the window. Inside, you close the book and stare into the hearth. You picture Carolyn Norton again, walking the streets in worn boots, not even allowed to collect her own letters because her husband had the legal right to intercept them. She lobbied Parliament for change and eventually, after years of petitions and pamphlets and humiliation, they passed the Infant Custody Act. A tiny step, but it made her dangerous. A woman who fought back with words. You imagine standing at the bar of that courtroom from earlier. You see yourself speaking, not as a witness, not as a victim, as a barrister in the ridiculous white wig no less. You chuckle at the image, but the laughter doesn't last long. Because the truth is, if you attempted it, if you walked into court and demanded to speak, you'd be laughed out. Or worse, you could be arrested. That's what happened to women who marched on Parliament in 1909. Many were beaten. One even chained herself to the railings and was dragged away, skirts torn, eyes blazing. You step out onto the street the next morning and glance at the newspapers lining the stand. The headlines shout about politics and empire. Somewhere deep inside, a single paragraph notes that a suffragist was ejected from Parliament for speaking. Not protesting, not rioting, just speaking. But it's 1887. You're still decades away from being allowed a vote, a voice, or a seat at the table. Your mind returns to that courtroom. You remember how it felt to sit silent while men spoke of justice as if it were theirs alone. The echoes still ring. You begin to write, not a novel, not a diary, a speech. It's messy and bold and far too long, but it's yours. And for the first time, the ink feels like power. You speak the words aloud, alone, in your room, half whispered into the wallpaper. Your voice trembles, but it doesn't fail. A week later, Alice hands you a pamphlet. A public debate is being held in the city and a woman is listed among the speakers. She'll be on stage, addressing a crowd. It's legal, barely. You decide to go. Not to speak, not yet, but to listen. Because history, you realise, is not only made by those who shout loudest. Sometimes it's built one whisper at a time. And when enough women whisper, the walls begin to crack. The train pulls into Cambridge with a shudder, trailing smoke like a sigh. You step down onto the platform, skirts brushing the stone, heart racing. Not because you're doing anything forbidden, technically, but because you're walking into a world where you're barely tolerated. A visitor, an accessory, a woman in the land of men. The colleges rise like fortresses beyond the city streets, stone towers, leaded windows and vast green quads that seem allergic to female footsteps. You and your chaperone make your way to Girton College, one of the few places in the entire country where a woman can study at a university level. Sort of. Girton sits on the outskirts like a polite exile, far enough to keep the male students comfortable, close enough to remind them you exist. The cab ride there is long and silent. Your friend grips her purse like armour. You've earned your place to study Latin, Greek, philosophy, every scrap of ancient wisdom the world can offer. But don't confuse this with fairness. You can take exams, you can hear lectures, but no degree will come, not a legitimate one. That diploma, stamped and sealed, belongs to men alone. You reach the college entrance. The structure is red brick, gentled by climbing vines. It carries the scent of chalk and aspiration. Within, young women rush about in wool gowns, their arms loaded with texts. One speeds by, gripping Euclid's Elements and a half-finished apple. Another mumbles Virgil to herself. The atmosphere crackles. They understand their fortune in being here. And they understand fortune has no connection to fairness. During your initial lecture, the professor keeps his gaze fixed elsewhere. As you walk in, he continues addressing the room, as though the whisper of your skirts means nothing more than a breeze. You sit in the rear with 3 other women. You record notes quietly, acting deaf to the boy in row 2 who breathes the words decorative additions under his voice. That evening, your roommate shares a story about a student from last term who achieved marks surpassing half the men in her mathematics class, only to be left off the official honours roster. She handled it gracefully, your roommate explains. Shifted to astronomy afterward. Said at least the heavens don't judge who observes them. You find comfort in that. The stars never respected boundaries. The pattern takes shape. Classes, study, library, tea. You're encircled by brilliance, women reciting Plato, solving problems, charting anatomy and chemical processes. Yet none of this will grant you the title of graduate because Cambridge refuses to award degrees to women. Not after years of effort, not even if you surpass the men. You catch someone joking that the university would sooner incinerate its robes than drape them over a woman. Someone else murmurs that when Girton first opened, opponents cautioned that excessive study would damage a woman's reproductive organs. You laugh until you recall that some still accept it. One night, you slip into the main campus simply to walk. You tread softly across the groomed grass, past the buildings of Trinity and St. John's, until you discover a statue of Isaac Newton bathed in moonlight. Briefly, you sense the excitement of standing here, surrounded by history's titans. But the feeling vanishes. A porter walks over, his face stern. "Have you lost your way, miss?" You give a small nod. It's simpler than clarifying that no, you haven't lost your way. Simply unwanted. You walk back to Girton with lowered eyes and damp shoes from the lawn. Nobody questions where you wandered. The other women understand the impulse to explore the forbidden corners of the university, to picture yourself crossing those grounds not as a visitor, but as a true scholar. During breakfast, someone reads from the Cambridge University Reporter. The piece lists new fellows and award recipients. All men, naturally. One name sounds familiar. A boy you sat near in the library. He once used your Latin notes, then acted like a stranger when his friends appeared. Now he holds a fellowship. You remain an oddity, but you learn to redirect the anger. You commit pages of ancient Greek verse to memory, deliver Cicero's orations, tackle mathematical proofs until your candle burns down. You and your peers debate Aristotle during tea, draw diagrams of planetary motion in cookbook margins, and challenge each other's reasoning with gentle, merciless clarity. The labour is demanding, exhilarating. It seems like quiet resistance. Then the examination arrives. You walk into the room, pen ready, bag tapping your side. The space feels thick with ink and hush. Lines of desks. Male students eye you as if your attendance might disturb their concentration. You settle into your seat and inhale slowly, recalling that day in the corset, the control required to breathe less and still maintain composure. This isn't much different. Time crawls. You write endlessly, sheets stacking in tidy columns. The problems are challenging but manageable. You exit the room exhausted, light-headed but satisfied. When marks appear, your name is present. Not on the formal printed roster, but added at the end in pencil, unofficially next to the male students you outperformed. A modest, silent recognition, insufficient for a degree, but sufficient to confirm you were noticed. Your instructor approaches you. He offers praise with the warmth of someone rewarding an animal for nearly mimicking speech. Quite remarkable for a woman. You express gratitude while privately picturing stabbing him with your inkwell. One of your peers, Eleanor, gets a letter from her father. He expresses pride, but warns her not to push too hard or risk becoming undesirable for marriage. She performs it aloud in the dormitory, treating it like tragic theatre. Everyone laughs, though the amusement rings empty. The term concludes. You gather your books, bid farewell to the vines and red brick walls. Several girls weep, not from departure, but from knowing they'll be erased. Their achievements won't feature in alumni records. They'll never be addressed as doctor or master. They'll return home as educated daughters, not academics. On your last morning, you cross the silent courtyards once more. The sky looks pale. You press your palm against the weathered stone of the lecture building and voice a quiet promise. Someday a woman will stand in this place and receive a degree bearing her name. Not in pencil, not as a footnote, but in proper ink. You climb aboard the train with your texts resting on your knees. A man seated opposite notices Euclid's Elements and asks with a sneer, "Is that your brother's?" You meet his stare. "No," you reply. "It belongs to me." Your boots strike the cobblestones of a cramped London street, the mist rolling in thick from the Thames like a threadbare blanket. You're 20 now, schooled, articulate, carrying more Latin than most office workers. Yet none of this secures you employment, not the kind that compensates fairly, not the kind that holds weight. The reality strikes you as you stand before the glass-fronted employment bureau, the roster of open positions fluttering on a notice board tacked to the wall. Typist, seamstress, nursery maid, companion to elderly widow, assistant in a hat shop. Not a single mention of law clerk, bank officer, engineer, or anything that might validate your education. Your fingers fidget with the envelope in your grasp, your recommendations, your glowing endorsements, and you start to question if they're merely elaborate page markers. Inside the agency, a woman studies you from behind a desk buried in folders. She wears pince-nez and bears the calm look of someone who's weathered this exchange countless times. "Any shorthand skills?" she inquires. "Yes." "Children?" "No." "Married?" "Also, no." She makes a sound, consulting a card. There's a governess opening in Surrey. 2 boys, 6 and 10. Reasonable pay. You'll need to sleep in the nursery. You pause. You don't especially enjoy children or Surrey, but it's either this or return to your mother's parlour and justify why the Cambridge expenses were squandered. The woman observes you closely. "You won't locate much else," she states, not cruelly, unless you're interested in nursing. You accept, take the card, and walk back into the street. The reality is, women labour everywhere, but only in specific roles. Governess, seamstress, teacher, nurse. If you're especially bold, a telegraph operator or shop assistant. But aspiration has boundaries, and those boundaries are sewn into your hem. Your cousin Edward, who abandoned school early and struggles to spell acquire, now makes double your potential working at a shipping company. He oversees ledgers, dictates to secretaries, and participates in meetings where men solemnly agree with his every word. You've listened to him speak. You're unimpressed, but society is. You, conversely, must accept ladylike employment, safe employment, silent employment. The variety that doesn't provide an office or a title or retirement benefits. The variety that disappears when you wed one of your acquaintances. Clara attempted to become a pharmacist's apprentice. She lasted 14 days before the shopkeeper's wife protested that her presence distracted the male patrons. Clara now sells stationery. she inscribes elegant script on wedding invitations for other women's destinies. Then there's Elsie, gifted with numbers, keener than any man you've encountered. She applied for a bank position using her initials. When she appeared personally, they mocked her, informed her they'd presumed she was a man and the position had been filled. Weeks afterward, the identical bank advertised a new opening. Men wanted clerks and bookkeepers. Women need not apply. You question whether there's any purpose in attempting. Then you recall the bookkeeper at the grocer's, the one who wears thick spectacles and never grins. She confided to you once, very softly, that she falsified her father's signature on her application, said the risk was worthwhile. She never corrected them when they assumed A.R. Morton was Albert. Now she reconciles ledgers during the day and reads poetry by gaslight. You take the governess card and fold it deliberately, not from surrender, but because you require time. Because even intelligent women must occasionally comply just long enough to locate the alternative entrance. The train to Surrey runs quiet, except for rustling newspapers and the sporadic cough from the elderly gentleman facing you. He doesn't acknowledge your presence, not even once. You're dressed appropriately, naturally. Clean gloves, proper skirt, hat secured perfectly. You appear entirely the respectable governess in waiting, but internally you harbour a tempest of ideas. The position isn't dreadful. The boys are bearable, the nursery comfortable. You instruct them in history, Latin and spelling. You fix their maps and conceal your annoyance when they laugh at the notion of a woman reading Tacitus. After dark, you smuggle your own books beneath your covers and read by the faint glow of a fading fire. Virgil, Locke, Adam Smith. You underline whole passages in pencil simply to retain the pleasure of thinking. Still, a peculiar emptiness accumulates over the weeks. Not tedium, something darker, erasure. You join meals with the children, but not with the household. You detect their merriment through the walls. The mistress references you in third person even when you're present. The cook addresses you as Miss Almost. Almost family, almost servant, almost honoured. But not entirely. One afternoon you listen to the master speaking with a visitor. Intelligent girl, our governess, knows Latin, maintains the boys' discipline. Ah, the visitor responds. A pity truly, all that intellect with no outlet. They chuckle. Your ears flame. You stay invisible, but not unhearing. On Sundays you compose letters to Alice, who's currently assisting with materials for the Women's Trade Union League. She describes factories where girls labour 12-hour shifts and still earn less than half a man's wage. Of a bootmaker's wife who attempted to establish a sewing cooperative but faced threats from her landlord for stirring discontent. Alice closes every letter, still thinking, still scheming. Your partner in rebellion. You cling to those words like a hidden lantern. Then arrives an intriguing afternoon. The boys are outside playing and you've stolen a moment for yourself. You retrieve the local newspaper and between an advertisement for tooth powder and a society column about someone's wedding veil, you discover it. Female clerk wanted. Literary agency applicants must be educated, French and Latin preferred. Apply by letter only. Your breath halts. It's a slim possibility, a spark, but it's something. You compose your letter that evening. You write with care, deliberately masking your desperation. You enumerate your studies at Girton, your teaching background, your command of Latin. You sign your name plainly, no initials, no deception. You seal the envelope and deliver it to the postbox personally, heart pounding like a drum. 1 week goes by, then 2. Then one Tuesday morning, a letter comes addressed to you. Not to the mistress, not to Miss Governess, to you. It's on clean cream paper and carries a faint scent of ink and London. Dear Miss, we would be delighted to meet you next Thursday regarding the clerkship. Please attend at 3 o'clock. That's all. No embellishment, no ceremony. But your hands tremble as you reread it. Not because it's a guarantee, but because it's possibility. You inform nobody. Not yet. Let them assume you're tutoring spelling. Let them picture you pressing Latin into little boys' minds while you secretly construct a bridge from this existence to that. Thursday, you depart for London in your finest coat, head elevated, gloves secure, heart brimming. Because perhaps, just perhaps, there's work available with your name attached. Not your husband's, not your father's. Yours. London smells transformed when you return, with a letter in your pocket and something resembling ambition in your chest. Not the timid variety you wore back in Surrey. This feels bolder, more defined. You step down from the omnibus near Bloomsbury and gaze up at the grey stone structure housing the literary agency. It's less impressive than you anticipated. Slim doorway, fractured window pane, a bell that clatters like it hasn't been maintained since Gladstone was young. Inside, a secretary, also female, examines you from behind a desk covered with manuscripts. She appears exhausted but interested. "You're here for the clerkship?" she inquires. You confirm. She vanishes into a rear office. Moments later, a man in a pinstripe waistcoat appears. He studies you over wire-rimmed spectacles, remains silent for an extended beat, then motions with his head. "Come along then." The space reeks of pipe smoke and moist paper. Manuscripts occupy every surface, drooping shelves, wobbling piles, folders bound with worn ribbons. He requests you translate a paragraph from French, then Latin, then repair a confused letter from an author up north who apparently cannot spell sincerely. You work calmly, accurately. You sense his gaze on your fingers as you write. When you conclude, he states, almost reluctantly, "Not bad." "How's your typing? You fabricate." "Fast." He shrugs. "We'll find out. You can begin Monday, 15 shillings weekly. It's less than half what a male clerk receives, but it's income. Your income. You leave the structure lighter than you arrived. You experience for the first time the sensation of something new, a key not to a space or a desk, but to yourself. You've forced open a door, and though it's narrow and the hinges protest, it leads somewhere. The position is chaotic. You organise manuscripts, transcribe pages deep into the night, handle correspondence between writers and publishers. Most of the authors presume you're a secretary. A few show courtesy. Some conclude their letters. "Dear Sir," despite knowing your name. One addresses you as mistyping hands. You archive his contract with a grin. But what astonishes you is you adore it. The scent of ink, the cadence of keys, the disorder of words assembling into stories. You adore observing ideas arrive jumbled and depart refined. You adore reading novels before anyone else does. You remain late, frequently not because you're instructed to, but because you choose to. You master the agency procedures, the rumours, the accounting records. You notice yourself identifying which authors succeed and which ones complain. You start maintaining a list of your own concepts, stories that haven't been composed yet. Not because you intend to write them not yet, but because they exist somewhere behind your ribs and merit a place to rest. Then one day it occurs. A letter appears, addressed to Mr. Joseph L. Harding. The envelope bears violet wax. The managing agent passes it to you without attention. "File that," he mumbles. You rotate it over. The penmanship is recognisable, slanted, refined. You realise it's from Mrs. Eliza Travers, one of the firm's best-selling novelists. She's never attended the office. She writes from Devon, mails her manuscripts by post, and her books vanish from shelves. You unseal the envelope and freeze. "Dear Sir," it opens. "I was recently notified that my correspondence is being managed by a young lady named Miss Harding. Permit me to express your letters have been sharper, gentler, and far more skillful than any I've received in my years with the firm. If only women operated more offices. Please do relay my appreciation." You reread it twice, then once more. She understands. She understands and she supports. You slip Eliza Travers's letter into your skirt pocket, fingers quivering slightly. You could present it to your employer, leverage it to negotiate improved pay, acknowledgement, even a raise. But you refrain. Not yet. Some triumphs taste sweeter when enjoyed in silence. That evening you compose a response on her behalf. Reserved, professional, filled with the courteous formality expected from a male clerk. But before you close the envelope, you insert a personal note on your own stationery. Just a few lines, unsigned. I'm thankful you noticed. Women like us construct things even when nobody watches. You post it before you can reconsider. The office becomes more hectic as winter nears, more manuscripts, more disorder. The partners start depending on you without awareness, asking where contracts are stored, which clients have been compensated, which proofs went to press. You respond without hesitation. You've constructed a map in your mind, the kind only invisible people have opportunity to create. But while your responsibilities expand, your title remains unchanged. You're still the girl, miss, that capable one. One afternoon, while balancing a tray of tea and a stack of rejection letters, you catch the junior agent remarking, "She's more intelligent than I am, but she's got the incorrect set of trousers." They laugh. You remain silent. Afterwards, you locate a private corner and breathe deeply. It's not the meanness that wounds, it's the truth. Regardless of your competence, your waistband confines you in position. Later that week, the agency accepts a new submission. A keen little novel situated in a girls' boarding school, saturated with sharp wit and silent rebellion. The manuscript comes anonymously. Your manager glances at the opening page and discards it aside. Another sentimental scribbler, he grumbles. You retrieve it from the trash. That evening, you consume the entire thing in one session. It's magnificent, not showy, simply truthful. The voice resembles yours, resembles Alice's, resembles every girl who occupied the back of the room with her hand lifted and was never acknowledged. You slip a note into the file and position it on your manager's desk. This deserves a second examination. 2 weeks pass. The agency extends the writer a contract. The author's name? Hartwell. No first name, no gender. You smile. When the book releases the following spring, it's a modest triumph. The reviews are favourable, if somewhat confused, surprisingly keen for such a humble little book. Uncommon perception, perhaps. The author is a schoolmaster. You and Alice toast with inexpensive champagne in her flat above the printer's shop. She performs the reviews aloud with theatrical energy, then leans close and whispers, "It was you, wasn't it?" You shake your head. Not this one, but perhaps the next. Because now you comprehend there's a method in. Even if the entrance reads men only, there's always a window crack, just sufficient for someone like you to slide through. The following day, you reach work early, open a fresh folder and start typing a letter. Not representing a client, but for yourself, a pseudonym, a plot, a pitch. You've observed how stories travel through this place. You understand which editors show sympathy, which ones will accept a gamble. And just like that, you commence your double existence. Clerk during daylight, writer by candlelight. Outside, London grumbles onward. Carriages, boot heels, fog. But inside this cramped office, beneath the awareness of men who believe you're only suitable for filing, you're constructing something daring, something bearing your voice, and they won't anticipate it. The proposal arrives on a Tuesday, a slender envelope, cream-shaded, bearing your name in assured blue ink. It reaches your boarding house, nestled among circulars and bills. You open it slowly, anticipating another rejection from a literary magazine or possibly an invitation from Alice to another suffragist lecture. But instead it's a marriage proposal. You study it twice before sitting. The man is known, gentle, pleasant, with considerate hands and a steady income. You encountered him at a bookseller's salon weeks prior. He mentioned he appreciated women with some education, mentioned it like it was a curiosity. You'd smiled courteously. And now here it exists, in ink, a proposal, considerate, thoughtful, offering a peaceful house, security, and a future containing books and children. He even composes, "I completely support your intellectual pursuits. You may continue reading philosophy if you like, as though it were a pastime, like embroidery." You fold the letter and stare through the window. Below, the street bustles, schoolboys in caps, a woman carrying a basket of pears, a lamplighter preparing for dusk. They navigate the world without understanding what's just been requested of you. Because marriage isn't merely love, not in 1890. Marriage is legislation. You've studied the statutes, you understand the figures. Once you wed, your earnings, every shilling, every future manuscript transforms into your husband's legal property. Your legal existence dissolves into his. You can no longer execute contracts. You forfeit the right to sue. If he decides, he may confiscate your mail, terminate your job, even relocate you to another town. Without your agreement, he would possess your body, your time. If children arrive, he determines where they reside, how they're raised, and if he abandons you, you receive nothing. You remember Caroline Norton again? Brilliant, beaten, eliminated. A knock interrupts your thoughts. It's Mrs. Fleet, the landlady, delivering tea. She notices the letter on the desk and lifts a brow. From a suitor? You confirm. Well, that's fortunate, isn't it? A respectable match nowadays is no minor blessing. She intends well. Her husband perished years ago. She operates the house independently, fiercely autonomous, yet constantly apologising for it. She never remarried. Too stubborn, she once stated. But you suspect it was the reverse. She knew the price. That evening, you draft your response. It requires 3 attempts. The first is excessively polite, the second excessively angry. The third conveys what you intend, sir. I value your kind letter, but I must refuse. I have no wish to exchange my signature for another's name, nor my mind for a kitchen. I intend no offence, only freedom. You seal the letter with trembling hands. The following morning you deliver it to the post and dispatch it before your courage dissolves. Later that day, a colleague at the agency congratulates you on what he describes as a very eligible suitor. You smile faintly, say nothing, but internally a different kind of pride establishes itself. Not all women could decline. Not safely, not simply. But you did it. And suddenly, for the very first time, you understand that turning down a marriage proposal is itself a kind of rebellion. Not through demonstrations, not through public declarations, but through a single quiet decision. No fanfare, no announcements, just silence. You keep the proposal to yourself, yet somehow the women in your life start to feel something has changed. It shows in how you move through the world, lighter now, not arrogant, but filled with silent determination. The office workers lift their eyes when you pass by. Mrs. Fleet adds an extra piece of toast to your breakfast plate each morning. Even Alice, dropping by one windy Thursday, studies you carefully and remarks that you seem transformed, like someone who finally put down something unbearably heavy. You smile. You don't mention it was a man's expectations. Still, not everyone approves. During Sunday tea, your aunt dangles the inquiry between careful sips. Have you heard anything more from Mr. Featherstone? No, you answer calmly. A moment passes, followed by a small resigned exhale, like hope flickering out. What a pity. But shame doesn't touch you. Instead, you feel unexpectedly spacious inside, as though your existence, once compressed into an impossibly tight form like boned stays, is now releasing piece by piece. You start noticing how many women live compressed into silence. There's the woman who washes clothes and confides that her husband consumes half her earnings and padlocks the kitchen before leaving. The retail clerk whose intended demands she resign after their wedding, despite her loving the work far more than she loves him. The writer whose poems appear beneath her brother's byline because nobody would take verse seriously from a woman. They're not demonstrating, they're not organising, yet each one, in her particular way, is quietly tucking herself into an existence that doesn't suit her shape. You return to writing, not merely fragments, not just correspondence, but complete pages. One tale centres on a young woman secretly operating a printing press. Another follows a widow who repurchases her deceased husband's obligations and recovers her business. They're fiction, certainly, but near enough to reality to draw blood. You haven't published them yet. You're still employed, still accumulating funds, still performing your role. Your position in society feels provisional, yet you start imagining something you've never permitted yourself before: independent living. Not in a servant's quarters or a family member's spare room, a space entirely your own, somewhere your ideas don't bounce off other people's demands. The notion seems absurd naturally. Property managers favour married renters. Financial institutions refuse to provide accounts to unmarried women without male co-signatories, securing a lease without a husband's backing. Nearly unthinkable, yet the impossible has never deterred you previously. You tour several properties while claiming to investigate on behalf of a friend. You assess the dimensions silently. You work out expenses on whatever paper you can find. You explore the surrounding streets, gradually discovering which areas feel secure and which don't. Then one misty afternoon, you discover it. A room situated above a bookbinding establishment, sloping ceiling, double-hung window, hearth with a damaged tile. The owner is aging, preoccupied, and primarily worried about timely payment. You execute the agreement in your name alone. Your first evening there, you arrange your volumes, position a solitary dish and teacup near the basin, and strike a match to light a taper. The quietness enfolds you like knitted wool. No masculine footfalls, no paternal judgments, only ancient timber settling and your heartbeat's rhythm. You settle at your writing table, instrument ready. You're unwed, unaccompanied, unclaimed, and you are at last, completely magnificently, your own. The space above the bookbinding shop carries scents of powder and printer's fluid, and on certain mornings of adhesive. It's confined true, and drafts whistle through the window joints. But it belongs to you. Your literature fills the shelving, your garment dangles from the peg, and your identity, solely your identity, marks the entrance. You maintain your kettle on the stovetop and your reflections on paper. Yet independence arrives, with a reality nobody cautioned you about. When a man resides alone, he's self-reliant. When a woman resides alone, she's disgraced, or something worse. Peculiar. Your fellow tenants grow inquisitive. Some maintain courtesy. One neighbour, the breadmaker's spouse, starts depositing leftover baked goods at your threshold. Another refuses to meet your gaze. At the market, the meat vendor addresses you as Mrs., then stammers through a correction. You've departed from the expected narrative. There's no spouse, no patriarch, no offspring clinging to your skirts. You're beginning to recognise that women like yourself, unmarried and untroubled, don't simply perplex society. You endanger it. The first genuine difficulty arrives with knocking. 2 uniformed constables at your entrance. Not aggressive, not unkind, simply intrusive. They've gotten a complaint, they explain, a worry. You're residing alone. You're accepting correspondence. You're moving about without an escort. You stare. Is that against the law? No, one responds. But it's unusual. We've been requested to check on your well-being. Your well-being, naturally. You suggest tea. They refuse. They don't investigate, don't charge anything, just observe. A subtle caution. You're under surveillance. Once they depart, you sit near the flames and sense your independence shifting somewhat, still present, but wavering. Alice comes by the following day. You relay what happened. She doesn't react with surprise. They visited me last year. Identical approach, identical inquiries. You ask what happened and she says she served them biscuits. Inform them her companion was a renowned musician residing in Austria. They couldn't figure out how to respond. You laugh more deeply than you have in weeks. Yet it remains with you. The intrusion, the interrogation, the scrutiny searching your dwelling for proof of misconduct, of peril. Because in Victorian Britain, a woman residing independently is viewed as dubious or tragic or damaged. The legal system provides her no safeguards. The publications label her aberrant. Even the mail carrier regards you strangely when you receive literature from Paris. Still, you persist. You start examining legal precedents, gradually, methodically. You discover that women can be judged mentally incompetent with merely a physician's documentation and authorization from a male family member. That women have been institutionalized for sadness, for defiance, for choosing to exist outside conventions. One account troubles you deeply. A woman in Yorkshire, unmarried and intelligent, who composed pamphlets regarding property legislation reform. Her brother declared her mad. She perished in an institution 6 years afterward. Her manuscripts destroyed. You extract the newspaper piece and preserve it tucked in your notebook, not to terrorize yourself, but to recall what's imperiled. Because your rented space isn't merely 4 boundaries, it's an act of defiance. You start writing with greater urgency, not solely stories now, but commentaries, reflections, focused criticisms of the structures surrounding you. You mark them with first letters, occasionally with a masculine pen name, occasionally unsigned completely. And when they're printed, distributed through lesser publications, nestled between sections on commerce or arts, you clip everyone and affix it inside your cabinet door. Your language exists publicly, and nobody, not a spouse, not a parent, not an officer, controls its interpretation. You start recognizing the methods by which women like yourself disappear. Not through mortality, but in the experiential sense, eliminated softly, without commotion. The property manager across the way had a sibling once, mentioned her frequently, then one day ceased. When you inquired, she averted her eyes and stated she married a financier, relocated to Kentucky. But her tone grew transparent, like fabric worn excessively. You sensed the reality existed somewhere beneath the surface. Another woman in your structure used to instruct music. A widow, pleasant, meticulous. One afternoon she's absent. Simply absent. No clarification, only murmurs that her late spouse's relative had worries that she'd become unstable. You discover her teacup still resting on the ledge. The following day, chilled, filled, abandoned. Your own identity appears on a flyer attached to an entrance. Women and lodgings, warning, no direct charge, merely suggestion. A gentle toxin infiltrating the structure. Yet, you remain. You compose. You exist. You move freely. Evening walks become your comfort. You traverse through Bloomsbury, beyond gas illumination flickering like troubled thoughts, beyond establishments and school children and pairs who stare slightly too intently. You draw your wrap closer and maintain forward vision. One evening you pass a man collapsed on the pavement, jacket damaged, container in grasp. Nobody intervenes. He's intoxicated, nothing beyond. But you wonder, had she been a woman alone, stumbling at that hour, what would have transpired? Would she receive assistance or be marked immoral, insane, removed? You understand the response. Society pardons men. But a woman alone must justify every movement, every darkness, every vessel left misplaced. One morning, you get correspondence from a young woman who encountered your recent commentary, printed anonymously in a minor reform publication. Her penmanship is uncertain but fervent. I don't know your identity, but thank you. I examined your work 3 times. It was the first thing that helped me feel rational in months. My father claims I contemplate excessively, that contemplation damages women's minds. I thought perhaps he was correct, but now I think he's simply frightened. You reread the correspondence, pulse quickening. Someone received your message. Someone required it. That evening, you ignite a taper and compose a response. You don't mark your identity, merely 2 words. Continue contemplating. Shortly more correspondence arrives, modest ones, cautious ones, wrapped in coloured paper or plain packaging. Some originate from young women in countryside schools, others from widows, a needleworker, a medical attendant. One comes from a domestic worker who encountered your commentary while tidying, her employer's workspace. They don't identify you, but they comprehend your actions. They perceive the form of your resistance and start tracing it with their own. You establish a new collection concealed behind the cabinet. Correspondence from women who perceive me, not prominent women, not affluent ones, but observers, silent rebels. Women who detect the boundaries, who've started pulling at the threads of the world they inherited. You recognise you're not isolated. The space above the bookbinding establishment isn't solely yours anymore. It's a meeting location, a sanctuary, an invisible parlour for suppressed voices, a reception space. Sometimes you still detect footsteps on the stairwell at irregular hours. Sometimes you still pause before the knocking. But the apprehension no longer exceeds the independence. You compose, you contemplate, you exist. And the world, despite everything, hasn't yet succeeded in compressing you back into silence. The correspondence is concise, scarcely a paragraph. Your sibling has died. The burial is Thursday. He will not allow you to encounter the children. No signature, merely the marking of your brother-in-law's legal representative. You examine it twice before the significance settles. Your sibling, your intelligent, joyful younger sister, is deceased, and the 2 small faces you once held on your lap. The children who still forwarded you clumsy illustrations each Christmas are now inaccessible. You sit in silence, fingers clutching the paper as London's sounds continue outside your window. A wagon clatters by, a merchant announces something somewhere, a piano sounds, a fractured scale. But inside the world has grown. Motionless, the burial is forbidden to you, that's made evident. He possesses complete authority now, as widower and parent. He dictates the ceremonies, the property, the children, everything she left. You were never married, you possess no rights. You're merely the relative, the sister, a woman without power. You journey regardless. The village is frigid and cramped, the roads bordered with shrubbery that never seems welcoming. You dress in black naturally, and maintain your head lowered as you walk beyond the burial ground. The entrance is secured. You don't attempt to access. You simply stand outside the metal bars, observing figures move between the monuments. Somewhere among them is her marker. Your hands remain folded. The wind stings your face. You're not permitted to mourn. Afterward, you circle to the residence, her residence. The draperies are pulled. The yard has grown untended. You don't knock. Instead, you wait until darkness and deposit a small package on the doorstep. Your sister's cherished scarf, a volume she lent you years prior, and a message for the children. You mark it plainly. Auntie. Return to London, you cannot rest. Your space feels excessively quiet, the boundaries excessively fragile. You walk, then compose, then destroy the paper to fragments. The reality won't emerge in orderly sentences. You visit the library and request a volume on guardianship legislation. The attendant observes you, but retrieves it nevertheless. The text is merciless. Under existing legislation, fathers maintain exclusive guardianship of children, even if violent, negligent, or brutal. Mothers may request for contact, but only if widowed, and even then it's not assured. A woman possesses no inherent right to her own offspring. You contemplate your sister, how she used to hum while she plaited her daughter's hair, how she pressed her lips to her son's brow every dawn, how those recollections now exist in a dwelling you're not allowed to approach. You start making inquiries quietly, carefully. a legal clerk at the coffee establishment, a widowed instructor whose son was claimed by his grandfather, a laundress whose daughter was dispatched to family without her approval. Their accounts accumulate like frost on glass, frigid, silent, irrefutable. You compose again an article, this time anonymous, titled A Mother's Silence. It's penetrating, lucid, and filled with fury. You submit it to a reform publication, not anticipating much. 2 weeks afterward, it's published. It ignites something. You receive more correspondence, some from women who surrendered guardianship, others from those too terrified to attempt. One includes a clipping from the Times. A magistrate has decided in support of a mother maintaining limited contact with her children after separation. It's not a triumph, not yet, but it's a tremor, and you're involved in it. You attach the article to your wall, not because it resolves anything, but because it reminds you. Sorrow refused becomes energy, and silence, when shattered, resonates further than you imagine. The pain persists, not solely for your sister, but for the void her disappearance creates. Those children now separated by legislation that regards mothers as provisional and fathers as absolute. You can still visualize their faces when you close your eyes. Her daughter with a dimpled chin, her son with his inquisitive expression. You wonder if they've been informed why you don't visit, or if gradually you're being eliminated from their existence like chalk in rain. You channel the pain into language. You compose correspondence, not to the children, not anymore, but to Parliament, to publishers, to activists. You dispatch them under pseudonyms, under initials, wrapped carefully so they don't damage in the envelope. Some are published, others are disregarded. But each one carries the silent rage of a woman who has witnessed how rapidly affection can be deemed meaningless by statute. You participate in a small assembly that convenes in the rear of a charity building once weekly. The women there are mature, mostly widowed, mostly exhausted, but they understand the legislation like professionals. No suffering. One has been petitioning for guardianship reform since before you could read. Another has 4 daughters and maintains a collection of news clippings in her knitting container. You observe more than you contribute. And then, one evening, you present your article aloud. The space grows silent. One woman dries her eyes. Another acknowledges slowly. At the conclusion, someone states, "You should forward that to Lady Stanhope. She has access to a Member of Parliament." You do. Nothing occurs for a month. Then, in early spring, you receive a brief note, handwritten, refined ink, confident strokes. "Your article was delivered to my notice. Would you be willing to convene to discuss your perspectives further?" It's signed Eleanor Stanhope, a noblewoman, an actual one. You travel to her residence with trembling gloves. Her reception room is entirely blue, fabric and bronze. She observes with concentrated eyes and an expression that suggests deep contemplation, not criticism. She poses questions, incisive ones, not about your emotions, but about legal framework, precedent, case legislation. You respond to all. She doesn't smile, but she acknowledges. "I believe you should assist in drafting the petition," she states. "You compose effectively and you comprehend the matter. It will possess more influence." With your contribution behind it, you stare. This is no leaflet. This is not a quiet section of a publication. This is the beginning of a legal challenge. You acknowledge. That evening, return to your small space. You illuminate every taper you possess. You distribute your notes across the floor and begin again, not as a mourning sister, but not as a disappeared aunt, but as a woman with an instrument sharp enough to disturb Parliament's foundations. Over the subsequent weeks, you labour in silence, managing manuscripts by day and composing policy by night. You correspond with legal professionals, examine precedents, refine language until each sentence resonates with clarity and force. The final version is 3 pages, solid, concentrated, human. You observe as Lady Stanhope examines it, acknowledges once and states, "It's time." When the petition is submitted, your identity is not included, but your language is. And when the determination comes narrow, hesitant but genuine, a provision is approved allowing mothers the authority to petition for shared guardianship in cases of separation, restricted but lawful. The publications barely acknowledge it, a few sentences positioned between maritime news and sports results. But you preserve it regardless. Affix it beside your sister's final correspondence, because this is for her and for the children who still don't understand why you vanished, and for the women who never received the opportunity to say farewell. The medical facility smells of disinfectant and lime, a sharp sterility that adheres to the rear of your throat. You're here on an assignment, a delivery from the bureau to one of the physicians who occasionally contributes as an editor. Nothing beyond, merely a stack of documents secured with cord meant to arrive on Dr. Russell's desk. But you remain. You've never witnessed the interior of a hospital section before, not like this, not as an observer and certainly not as a man might, moving unrestricted, notebook in hand, records in pocket, voice elevated without hesitation. Medical attendants move between beds like small birds, their uniforms rigid and marked. Patients groan softly behind narrow curtains. A boy cries in a corner as a woman with reddened eyes applies a moist cloth to his brow. At the corridor's end, a doctor strides past, his coat billowing like a flag. He does not acknowledge you. You locate the office. Dr. Russell is bent over a chart, spectacles sliding down his nose. He accepts the documents without gratitude and returns to his records. You clear your throat. He glances up. Oh yes, the young woman from the bureau. You acknowledge. Something crosses his face. You're the one who interpreted that French manuscript last winter, aren't you? The one about the Marseille plague. You acknowledge again, this time more deliberately. He reclines in his chair. Didn't anticipate that half the clerks we receive can't spell syphilis, much less interpret Latin footnotes. He states it as though it's praise, though you're uncertain. You hesitate, then inquire, do you admit women as students? He reacts with surprise, then smirks. No, naturally not. This isn't France. And there it is. In France, women have started accessing medical schools. Not numerous, not simply, but it's occurring in Britain, though you're fortunate to be admitted into the structure, much less the teaching hall, so still you persist. Would you ever contemplate it? He gestures dismissively. It's not my decision, but between us. He indicates toward the entrance with a grimace. They don't favour the concept. Women collapse, get agitated. Imagine one fainting in surgery. Impractical. You state nothing. He proceeds. Besides, we already have medical attendants. That's labour they're appropriate for. Gentle hands, soft voices tidying up, maintaining calm. You acknowledge once and express gratitude, then depart. But the words settle in your chest like needles. You contemplate Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, the first woman in Britain to qualify as a physician only after years of rejection, of disguising as a man, of establishing her own hospital when nobody else would accept her. You contemplate the women you've encountered, intelligent, inquisitive, stable. None of them inclined to collapsing, but even if they were, men collapse too. Nobody excludes them from education for it. You start visiting the medical library during your midday intervals. Initially, you sit quietly, feigning to search for novels. Then you move closer to the anatomy shelves, the surgery manuals, the texts on childbirth and fever. The librarian disapproves the first time you request Gray's Anatomy, but he provides it. You examine slowly, following the diagrams with your eyes, learning the structure of the body like a language. And then one afternoon you encounter her, a woman no older than 30, in a dark dress with ink-marked cuffs. She sits across from you at the extended table and examines a surgical journal in complete silence. When you glance upward, she does too. Nobody ever inquires why I'm here, she states. You smile. Would it change anything? She shakes her head. Only if I inquire. Her identity is Ms. Lister. Not doctor, not medical attendant. Simply Lister, with a face that doesn't react and hands that don't fidget. She's a midwife by designation, but a physician by practice. You encounter her again the following week and the week afterward, always in the rear corner of the library, where the powder is thick and the atmosphere smells of old bandages and ink. She examines voraciously disease study, surgical case examinations, anything the male students abandon, and she transcribes it all in a notebook, careful, systematic, with observations in the margins. Inefficient closure technique, fatal error in dosage, female patient unlisted. One afternoon you finally inquire, "Why do you do it?" She doesn't glance up because the doctors never clarify why she died. The she transforms every week. Sometimes it's a cleaning woman, sometimes it's a seamstress. Once it was a young woman no older than 12. They record her as complications, but it's always identical. Neglect, shame, ignorance. Nobody acknowledges a woman's suffering. She presents you her notebook, sketches of organs, lists of symptoms, procedures she's never been instructed but somehow comprehends. In one margin she's written, "Inquire why there's no chapter on miscarriage." You examine beside her. Afterward, quietly, steadily, the two of you establish a silent agreement, not of ambition, but of remembering. Remembering the ones who were not documented, whose deaths were footnotes or dismissed with Latin terms that conceal the reality. The hospital maintains its own secrets. You discover that sometimes women are delivered under false identities, especially if they've attempted to terminate a pregnancy. The medical attendants understand naturally. They murmur it, but the doctors record nervous condition or blood poisoning, then proceed. One day you accompany Lister through a side entrance, beyond linen storage and quiet corridors, to a section they don't present to visitors. There, women rest curled in narrow beds, some excessively thin, others excessively still. Lister examines, pulses, dabs, brows, murmurs, compassion where the doctors offer only absence. "These are the ones who don't suit the records," she states softly. "Too impoverished, too vocal, too unmarried." You assist her changing a dressing. It's your first time touching someone like this, a stranger, exposed and fevered, grasping your wrist in desperation. You don't collapse, you don't retreat. You simply remain steady. That evening, you compose again. Not fiction, not commentaries. A medical case report about a woman delivered with internal bleeding, unnamed, unclaimed, dismissed. You describe her symptoms, her pulse, her outcome. You exclude the hospital's identity, but you include everything else. You submit it under the name J. Harding to a small medical gazette. 3 weeks afterward they print it. No celebration, no byline, but there it is, in black ink and narrow columns. Her account. Lister examines it twice, acknowledges once and states, "Good." They can't disregard what's printed. You start composing more reports, observations, the occasional rebuttal to a dismissive editorial. Some publications reject them, others print them, assuming you're a man. You don't correct them. You attend public lectures, standing in the rear, silent but burning. You memorize everything. Once a medical student collides with you and mutters, "Pardon me, madam, you're blocking." You smile, move aside, and contemplate. Contemplate only for now, because women like you and Lister are not blocking. You're constructing the pathway, not for recognition, for the next woman who enters behind you, already bearing the weight of being overlooked. You never intend to compose about desire, not in public, not in print. Certainly not in Victorian Britain, where a woman's body is a subject for whispers, warnings, or weddings, but never curiosity. Yet, here you are, seated at your desk on a rainy Thursday, confronting a blank page, pen positioned above forbidden territory. It commenced with correspondence. A young woman, a stranger, but not unfamiliar, composed to express gratitude for your article on midwifery and unrecorded deaths. But at the conclusion of her message, almost as an afterthought, she added, Do you know of anything composed by women about what we experience, not solely pain, but desire? You examine that sentence again and again because it wasn't merely a question. It was a fracture in the silence, a fracture wide enough to permit something dangerous in honesty. So now you sit contemplating how to respond. There are no genuine books, not the kind you can examine openly. There are medical texts, naturally, frigid, clinical, composed by men who regard the female body like a malfunctioning apparatus. Hysteria, wandering womb, moral corruption. That's the vocabulary available to describe a woman who desires more than dutiful silence in the bedroom. You recall being informed years prior that good women don't enjoy intimacy, that it's something they tolerate, that passion is foreign, masculine, and when it appears in a woman, it must signify madness. You recall how, when you were 16, you inquired your aunt why men could visit brothels but women were expected to remain pure. She turned pale and stated, "Don't inquire such things. It's aberrant for you to wonder, but what if it's not? What if the aberrant thing is feigning you don't?" You begin to compose, not as a teacher, not as a reformer, but as a woman. About the first time someone brushed your wrist and your breath caught in your throat. About the thrill of a glance held slightly too long. You lie awake through the nights, not gripped by fear, but pulled by some unnamed curiosity that won't let you rest. You keep the words indirect, poetic, yet honest. The piece becomes letter from the quiet heart. There's nothing scandalous in it, no mention of flesh or deeds, yet it thrums with yearning, with unasked questions, with a warmth no lacing can suppress. You send it under E. Harding to a modest literary journal known for printing refined sentiment. You assume they'll turn it down. But there it is, printed, not up front, but tucked on page 6, sandwiched between verse about roses and a critique of gardening books, your voice sitting there. The exposure feels like stepping into church with your collar undone. You brace for outrage, for whispers turning sharp. Instead, something unexpected unfolds. Letters arrive, brief ones, cautious ones. Women expressing gratitude for naming something they've never voiced. Some sign only with letters. One writes, "I believed something was wrong with me, perhaps it isn't." You answer every single one. The dialogue starts to expand, moving beyond love or matrimony into territory about wanting, about choice, about the gap between being wanted and being permitted to want back. You begin a new folder, like the custody one, but this stays locked behind the wardrobe. You label it Women Who Wondered, and inside every page holds evidence that there are far more like you than anyone admits. The letters transform you in ways you hadn't anticipated. Some arrive barely legible, trembling ink. A wife married 2 decades writes she's never experienced what others call pleasure. A young widow admits she pretended sleep every night of her union. One girl describes weeping on her wedding night without understanding why until your words reached her. Each letter feels like quiet rebellion, not shouting, not forceful, just a steady hum of, "Yes, me too. I had no idea. I assumed I was alone." Then one comes from a doctor's wife, mature, schooled. She offers thanks and adds, "Desire carries no shame, but silence breeds sickness." You transcribe that sentence and tuck it behind your curtain where nobody looks, but you know it's present. Some nights, when the world attempts again to shrink you into nothing, you glance toward it and remember. Yet the world pushes back. Newspapers carry editorials condemning the surge of female impropriety and civilization's moral collapse. One column ridicules your piece specifically, though naturally without naming you. Dangerous sentimentality, they label it. Barely disguised corruption, wrapped in flowery language. You rip the page apart, then you compose a response. Not for the paper, they'd never run it, but for the women in your folder. This time your writing cuts deeper, still measured, still cloaked in metaphor, but with edges underneath the softness. You write about society punishing women who experience feeling and eliminating those who articulate it, about shame originating not in flesh but planted there, passed down through generations by people too terrified to acknowledge women burn as well. You name it, the fire beneath the quiet. It circulates, reprinted in a Welsh publication, then referenced in a talk on women's mental wellness. A suffragist pamphlet even republishes the closing paragraph boldly, your initial still visible. Suddenly your careful words carry further than expected and consequences follow. One afternoon your landlord appears, not Mrs. Fleet, but a man you've never encountered, her cousin, recently managing the building. He announces your rent's going up. No warning, no reasoning, just a polite expression that never reaches his gaze. You understand this moment. He's learned something, noticed something, objects to something. That evening you pack your folders without speaking, you relocate once more. A tinier room, frigid, dimmer, but more secure, temporarily. Writing doesn't stop. You enter a different discussion circle, this one meeting behind a dressmaker's shop. The women present are pointed and fearless. They discuss medical reform, publishing ventures, physical autonomy. One passes you a French translation of a woman physician's memoir. Another shares a draft novel about a woman abandoning her husband who survives it. You laugh. Such a straightforward thing, yet it registers as heresy. You start composing a story. Not merely an essay, not correspondence, an actual novel about a woman asking questions, daring to experience more than society allows, refusing silence. It frightens you, confirming it's worth completing. Upon finishing, you submit it under a different name, a masculine one, just once. Weeks pass before the acceptance arrives. Narrow, refined. Your pulse accelerates. They're publishing it. They describe it as boldly introspective and shockingly honest for a first novelist. You reread that phrase and smile. Shockingly honest. If they only understood. You stand before the ticket window at Paddington Station, your breath visible in the crisp morning cold, gripping a compact case and an even smaller confidence. Travelling alone, the clerk behind the glass looks concerned. Will your husband meet you at destination? No, you answer. Going to Bath unaccompanied, are you? You confirm with a nod. He wavers. Then, carrying the exhaustion of someone who's chosen not to question today, stamps your ticket and pushes it forward. You accept it with quiet victory. A woman, a trip, no companion. The platform carries scents of coal smoke and damp wool. Benches hold couples and businessmen. You pull your shawl tight, fixing your eyes on the tracks as the locomotive trembles awake. Boarding draws, stares, not aggressive but puzzled, as though solving a mystery. Why does a woman travel solo? Where's her husband? Her escort? Her justification? You locate a window seat and open your book. Something to appear busy, less approachable. A gentleman across tips his hat. You nod once, firmly. He remains silent. The train jerks into motion and something within you releases. You recall how impossible this would have been mere decades back. No compartments existed for unescorted women, no safeguards, no assumption a woman had independent business. Even today, timetables aren't designed for you. Hotels might refuse service. Letters of introduction might be demanded. A solitary woman with luggage remains peculiar, or worse, scandalous. You've heard accounts. A woman mistaken for a prostitute, denied lodging, a widow accused of wandering, reported to her minister. One acquaintance, travelling to nurse a sick relative, was instructed to sit separately so gentlemen wouldn't be disturbed. You know these things, yet you travel regardless. Beyond the window, countryside blurs, smoke trails like loose ribbon. The wheel's rhythm becomes calming to your nerves. You sip tea from a metal flask and permit yourself the smallest grin. This is independence's flavour, slightly metallic, slightly chilled, but genuine. You reach Bath by early afternoon. The city presents pale stone and cold air and faint mineral spring scent. You're attending a lecture by a woman doctor, no less, smuggled onto the public schedule under anatomical hygiene. You register at a guest house using your own name. The clerk's eyebrow lifts. You lift yours back. Your room is cramped, bed crisply made. You unpack only necessities. At the lecture hall, you choose a rear seat. The audience mostly contains women, widows, nurses, governesses. Several courageous men sit rigidly near front. The speaker enters without fanfare. She's mid-40s, hair severely pulled, voice steady. She discusses the body with composed precision. Uterus, lungs, nerves. Not mysteries, but realities. At one moment she states, "A woman's body holds no shame. Only the silence surrounding it does." The room freezes. You sense something transform. The return journey feels quieter, but the silence is now deliberate. You sit taller. A man inquires if you're going home. You respond truthfully, "No, returning to work." He nods, somewhat bewildered. But you don't elaborate, don't defend. You've travelled, learned, and fear no longer accompanies moving forward alone. The train carries you back to London, but you don't feel you're returning to something smaller. You feel enlarged, altered. The rail rhythm echoes inside your chest. Not simply movement, but momentum. You've departed alone and come back, and nobody arrived to retrieve you. At the guest house, the landlady had asked carefully, "Your husband didn't join you?" You'd smiled. No, he didn't. She didn't pursue it, but her expression softened slightly. Now, back in your rented room above the bookbinders, you unpack your case slowly. A pamphlet from the lecture, a postcard showing Roman baths, a small scented soap bar you purchased from a shop window, simply because you enjoy the fragrance. You've begun gathering things like that. Small pleasures, not presents, not utilitarian purchases, just things bringing you satisfaction. It still registers as somewhat revolutionary. Days later, you attempt booking another trip, this time Oxford, but resistance returns. "We regret informing you we cannot accommodate unaccompanied ladies presently." A neat sentence folded with courtesy, threaded with shame. It stings, though doesn't shock you. Because regardless of lectures attended or stations passed through, the world still views you as questionable. Women alone signal instability. Women alone raise suspicions. Women alone might be plotting something. You are, though not their assumption. At the agency, a junior editor jokes about a female novelist's nervous travels, suggesting naturally she must be either hysterical or unfaithful. You respond lightly. Perhaps she simply wanted perspective from a different window. He chuckles, missing the point, but your supervisor peers over his spectacles with something resembling respect. Later, back in your room, you write about the journey. Not a story, not yet, just observations. You write about the train seat smelling of tobacco, the guest house mirror with its top left crack, the speaker's voice saying, "Our movement isn't a sprint, it's a procession." One by one we advance. You write until midnight. Then, beneath everything, you draft a manifesto. Brief, just 3 statements. 1. Women have the right to move through the world unaccompanied. 2. Women have the right to pursue knowledge beyond what's offered. 3. Women have the right to rest wherever they land. You show nobody, you send it to no paper, you simply pin it behind your door beside other papers reminding you of your identity. A week passes before a friend writes requesting you visit her in Bristol. She's recently widowed, mentions missing open conversation. You pack your case again? The ticket clerk still hesitates. The porter still raises eyebrows. But this time, approaching the platform, you don't clutch your shawl like protection. You walk with confidence belonging to someone who's ventured into the world and returned, not erased, not punished, but made more substantial. Each time you travel alone, the world expands slightly for women following. The will gets read in a drawing room smelling of pipe smoke and aged velvet. You sit quietly at the edge, gloved hands folded while names are called and fortunes shift with the solicitor's voice. The old man, your great-uncle, died as he existed, frowning, wealthy and suspicious of women. You hadn't contacted him for years, but family stories reached you. He once labelled his daughter's piano an indulgence, his wife's charity work a distraction, and his niece's university education an expensive vanity act. Still you came, not from hope, just to witness. The solicitor clears his throat. And to Miss Eleanor Harding, you blink hearing your name. £1 a family Bible copy and a note reading, a woman of words should read the correct ones. Polite coughing ripples around the room. You feel your ears burn. £1, a book, a barb disguised as guidance. You thank the solicitor, exit quietly, say nothing while the cousin inheriting the house pats your shoulder with practiced sympathy belonging to someone never ignored. Outside, though, you do something years haven't seen. You laugh, not with cruelty, not bitterness, just softly, as though someone told a tired joke one final time and you finally refused being the punchline. The inheritance doesn't trouble you. You anticipated nothing, but the Bible catches you unprepared. It's ancient, bound in cracked leather. Inside the cover, your great-uncle's name appears in ink, faded, nearly ghostly. Margins overflow with notes, verses circled, passages underlined. His handwriting is sharp, slanted, insistent. You bring it home not as relic, but as evidence of a world attempting to define you, even in its final breath. That week you visit the Public Records Office. You're researching something else entirely, a historical reference for a novel you're shaping. While the clerk retrieves a ledger, you glance through a probate register on the counter. You notice something peculiar. In will after will, daughters receive lace, trinkets, sentimental jewellery. Sons receive houses, bonds, land. You trace your finger down the page. A woman named Mary receives her mother's brooch. Her brother receives the entire estate and all associated holdings. Another woman, Ruth, is left the piano's use until marriage, when it reverts to her father's estate. Your pulse tightens. You begin copying names, dates, disparities. You visit the records office again the following week, then again regularly. You fill a notebook. It's not just your family, it's policy, wrapped in sentiment, patriarchy disguised as kindness. Let her keep the teacups, he'll manage the money. You write a piece this time, not hidden, not anonymous. You sign your name, it's titled The Cost of Lace. You send it to a larger paper, the kind rarely publishing women unless they're writing about gardens or grief. Surprisingly, they print it. It creates a stir. Letters pour in, some defensive, some dismissive, but many from women seeing their lives reflected in the lines. My grandmother left me only a bonnet. I was told land wasn't a lady's concern. My brother sold my inheritance for gambling debts. I received a necklace. You add every story to your notebook. The next time someone mentions inheritance, you don't nod politely. You say, we remember what we're given and what we're denied. The article spreads outward, not loudly, not like a balcony speech or courtroom outburst, but like tide, steady and undeniable. You begin receiving notes through back channels, women you've never met, introducing themselves with caution and gratitude. Many begin identically. You said what I never dared put into words. Some enclose fragments of their own wills, carefully worded clauses, attempts at fairness. A teacher who left her books to her niece instead of her brother. A widow who placed her modest savings in trust for her unmarried sister. Quiet corrections to a broken script. But you also hear from those still trapped within it. A woman in Yorkshire writes her father's will, names her husband as guardian of her inheritance. She's 29, childless, and must now request permission to access her own funds. A young wife in Sussex writes in pencil, words tight and slanted. He's rewritten his will without informing me. I discovered the draft in his desk. Everything goes to his cousin, not me. You reply to them all, not as a lawyer, you're not one, but as a witness, as proof that someone's paying attention. You write a follow-up piece, not ours to keep. In it, you outline how women, though trusted with daily home management, are so rarely trusted with the homes themselves. You compare dowries to bribes, heirlooms to hush money. You include stories, real ones, with permission. Each anecdote lands like a pebble in still water. Some men write outraged. She should be grateful for anything at all. Women don't understand property law. This is dangerous rhetoric. You smile reading that last one because it's accurate. It is dangerous, but not to justice. Then one evening, a different letter arrives. This one's from a solicitor, a woman. Yes, a female solicitor. Rare, nearly impossible. But there she is, her name typed cleanly at the page bottom, followed by legal advisor and advocate for equitable estates. She thanks you, then asks, would you be interested in helping us draft a guide for women? A handbook for inheritance rights and strategies to avoid disinheritance. You agree, naturally. Suddenly your evenings are filled again. You meet in quiet tea-room corners and dusty back offices. The solicitor, Ms. Alden, is sharp-eyed and efficient. She's been helping women rewrite their wills for years. They don't always listen, she says, but some do, and that's where change starts. You bring your notebook. She brings precedent. Together you write A Woman's Guide to Her Legacy. It's part legal advice, part emotional armour. You publish it anonymously, but it spreads not through shops, but hand to hand, cousin to cousin, friend to friend, pages tucked inside prayer books, hidden in sewing boxes, read by candlelight, then passed along. You begin hearing whispers of wills being rewritten, quiet personal revolutions. To my daughter, my ledgers and land. To my niece, the silver and the savings. One even leaves a line because I read that article. You close your Bible, the one your great-uncle gave you, only now you've repurposed it. The margins are no longer his, they're yours, filled with notes about property law, family stories, and corrections to narratives men once believed they wrote alone. Because inheritance, you've learned, isn't just money, it's memory. It's the shape of what we leave behind. And thanks to you, more women are beginning to write their endings and their beginnings in their own names. The printing office smells of hot metal and ink, the scent of urgency pressed into paper. You stand just inside the entrance, clutching a folded reprint of your latest article. Not from the agency, not from a publishing house, from a women's paper, the London Herald for Reform, printed weekly on cheap paper, run entirely by women. You're not there to submit another story. Not yet today. You're here because of last night. A letter was slipped under your door. No signature, just a square of thick stationery. You may be interested to know the editor of the Whitehall Times has been refusing female contributors, even under pseudonyms. He's begun comparing submissions against social ledgers, names, addresses. Unmarried women are being blacklisted. You'd stared at the paper, stunned, not because it was unexpected, but because someone finally admitted it aloud. You show the note to Ms. Alden the following morning. She nods grimly. I've heard similar things, she says. Even some women's letters to the editor are being intercepted before reaching the print room. Now here you are at the Herald. Inside, the space hums with quiet defiance. Stacks of folded editions, typecases open like toolkits, and two women in aprons setting type with ink-stained fingers. One, older, with a grey streak in her bun, glances up. Here to write or to fight? She asks, only half joking. Both, you reply. She laughs. You'll fit in. You spend the day learning their process. How to set type, how to ink rollers, how to work quickly in case of inspections. The Herald is legal, but barely. Any article deemed incendiary or dangerously feminist can be seized. The printer too. And you. One girl shows you a pile of rejected letters to mainstream newspapers. We print these, she says. We don't ask permission to exist. By evening your fingers are blackened, your arms ache, but your spirit crackles. You've never felt so useful, so precise, so loud, even in silence. You're handed a small desk in the back. No nameplate, just a chair, a drawer and a promise. Space to speak. Your first editorial appears the following week. The Gatekeepers and Their Keys. In it, you write about how male editors shape public voice by simply choosing who speaks and who vanishes. How easy erasing a woman is without tearing her pages. Just never print her at all. The response is immediate. Not publicly, but in letters. So many letters from women told their work was too emotional, too academic, not of general interest. You post excerpts in the next issue with permission. No edits, just their own words. Then something strange happens. A man writes in. His letter is printed in full at the grey-haired typesetter's insistence. He writes, "I had no idea so many women wrote that they wanted to. I never thought to ask." It's not an apology, but it's an opening. You begin to recognise a pattern. Women don't stop writing. They just stop sending their work to places where silence is the default reply. So you and the Herald change tactics. You begin reaching out first to school teachers, seamstresses, midwives, daughters of clergymen. You ask them what they would write if someone promised to read it. Slowly, the tide turns. Not in Parliament, not yet, but in print, where women begin to see themselves not just quoted, but heard. The print room becomes a second home. Ink under your fingernails, typeset blocks stacked like puzzle pieces, a low chorus of presses groaning to life, turning blank paper into protest. Each week the Herald grows heavier, not in pages, but in weight, in meaning. It's no longer just a publication. It's a meeting place, a map, a lantern in the fog for women who've never seen themselves on a page. But not everyone is pleased. A rival paper prints a snide editorial, the lady nest of tea and trouble. Another calls your publication whispering hysteria in corseted sentences. You pin both articles to the wall in the typeset room. Badges of honour, says the old typesetter with the grey streak, means they noticed. Still, with attention comes scrutiny. One morning, a clerk from the Office of Publications arrives for an informal review. His moustache twitches as he scans the shelves. He picks up an issue and flips through slowly, eyes pausing on an article about factory girls denied wages during illness, then another about a woman forced to leave her teaching post after marrying. He clears his throat. Your journal borders on the political. You smile sweetly. The political often begins with the personal. He frowns. You should take care. When he leaves, the room stays quiet for a while. Then the girl who runs the hand press says, "Let's add 2 extra pages next week." The issue after includes a bold new section, the red page, so called because the margins are printed with a single thin red border. It's not explained. It doesn't need to be. Readers begin sending in their own red pages, stories of being dismissed, disowned, discredited. A factory girl whose wages were given directly to her father. A schoolmistress accused of corrupting morals by teaching literature written by women. A widow evicted for having no male heir. You dedicate a drawer in the back office to these letters. It fills within weeks, overflowing with truths. Then one arrives that makes your hands shake. It's from a woman who worked at the Whitehall Times, a former typesetter, quiet, efficient, discarded after she corrected a misprint in a senior editor's column. She writes, "I used to set the lines for Parliament speeches, and not once did I see a woman's words enter that chamber. I think you are building the first real floor we've stood on." You read it aloud to the team. No one speaks for a moment. Then someone says, "We should print the floorboards." The next issue features on the inside back cover 4 full columns of anonymous excerpts from women's letters. Just their words. No edits, no commentary, just voices laid down like planks. You call the feature "The Floor We Speak From," and just like that, the Herald stops being a whisper. It becomes a chorus. You never expected to become an editor. You were a clerk, a governess, a girl in a corset trying to breathe. But now you are something else. A woman with a press behind her and 1,000 more beside her. You're walking past the Gentlemen's Club on Pall Mall when it happens. Not an accident, not a scandal. Just a glance, a fleeting one, from a man in a dark coat who watches you approach, then steps aside to ensure you don't come too close to the entrance. He doesn't scowl, doesn't sneer. He simply acts as though your presence near the threshold might unbalance the universe. Perhaps it might. You've passed this building before dozens of times on your way to meetings, to printers, to bookstores. But today it lands differently. You stop, look up, let your eyes trace the polished plaque reading the Paragon Club and then the smaller line beneath. Founded 1833, gentlemen only, united. You know what happens inside. Letters written, votes decided, campaigns debated, influence traded over roast beef and port. Laws whispered into motion by men with full pockets, an empty awareness of the women they govern. You stand outside the place where your words are consumed, but your presence forbidden, where your inheritance reform was ridiculed, then quietly enacted half a year later, where they speak of advancement without consulting those who need it most. You wait longer than necessary. A porter moves beyond the glass. You step backward, not from terror, from strategy, because you've already figured it out. They don't exclude women because we lack ability. They bar us because once inside we might question who erected these barriers to begin with. Days later you find yourself at a friend's drawing room, a rare night of both sexes present, carefully arranged to maintain propriety. The talk begins slowly. Climate, theatre, garden shows. Then someone raises politics and another dares mention reform. A man declares, "Understand, we're not against advancement. It's simply that women's intellects aren't designed for public affairs. Too delicate." You lift an eyebrow. And yet countless of us endure. Labour, conflict, destitution, desertion. But you're correct, we are remarkably delicate. The atmosphere shifts. Some grins, some throat clearing, but one woman opposite catches your gaze, keen and bright, like a secret signal held in quiet. You receive more invitations afterward, discreet ones, sitting rooms filled with intelligent, purposeful women, former educators, birth attendants, office workers, even a couple of titled ladies whose spouses travel frequently, conveniently. You debate everything: schooling, ballot access, compensation. You chart power structures without any invitation from the men who constructed the framework. But the club entrance remains sealed, so you establish your own. It's modest, merely a leased space over a tailor's establishment in Soho. A placard on the entrance, the assembly. No embellishments, no justifications. Within, tea, ink, and an open container marked what we understand. You start with 10 women, then 15, then 30. Weekly someone contributes something fresh. A speech duplicate, a trial transcript obtained secretly, correspondence from a parliamentary relation who speaks excessively at supper. You organise the fragments, weave them into documents, pass them discreetly to other reading spaces, other women's societies, other hidden kitchens where futures are being crafted alongside the evening stew. You master listening, maintaining records without documentation, posing inquiries without revealing identities, enduring as an organisation not intended to survive. The Paragon Club remains standing, still gleaming, still arrogant, but increasingly its patrons wonder why their servants deliver papers with statements they don't recall authorising, why their spouses know their voting patterns before the Morning Times arrives. You never cross that club's threshold, but your influence does, frequently. The assembly expands quietly, like climbing vines on brick. Not through banners or fanfare, but with warm loaves shared at a table, with hushed updates concealed between pages of loaned fiction. You never intended it to become an establishment, yet it's starting to resemble one. Every Thursday, the space fills. Some women arrive directly from businesses, aprons dusty with flour or ink. Others appear in gloves, faces flushed from coaches and breeze. The tea is perpetually too diluted, the seating perpetually mismatched, but nobody objects. There are no ranks, no pecking order, just inquiries. This week, the The subject is ballots. I discovered that women in New Zealand participated in an actual election. Someone mentions not merely petitions, genuine ballots. A silence that's thousands of miles distant. Another responds, "It wouldn't occur here." You remain silent briefly. Then softly, "Not yet." A woman from Yorkshire rises. "My cousin's spouse attempted attending a political lecture last year. They refused her at the entrance, claimed it would agitate her excessively. She's 43 and operates a dairy farm." There's laughter, harsh, acrid. Then the discussion deepens. You examine strategies, not simply voting privileges, but speaking privileges, writing privileges, privileges to gather, to publish, to comprehend. Someone proposes compiling a guide, how to articulate in a space full of men who believe you shouldn't. You all consent. By this point, your assembly's papers have expanded from a container to a secured cupboard. Records on wage theft, on school dismissals, on terminated teachers and prohibited books, on women's societies that were closed for safety and libraries that refuse memberships to anyone without a spouse's consent. One night, 2 fresh members enter, reserved, watchful sisters. They observe for weeks before contributing. Then one evening they disclose they serve as junior clerks for a solicitor's office handling parliamentary mail. They've witnessed things. Proposals drafted, correspondence rejected, documents rewritten before reaching ministers. One extracts a folded paper from her sleeve. This was the initial language in the education reform proposal. They altered it before discussion, eliminated every reference to girls' schools. You accept the sheet carefully. The ink is blurred but legible. You display it on the partition. The following Herald publishes an article, Redacted Futures. What they don't discuss. Your identity isn't on it. Nobody's is. But the correspondence arrives regardless. And then something different occurs. A man appears. Not at the assembly, but beyond, lingering in the passage as women depart. He approaches you, hat in hand. A writer from a progressive publication. He's studied your work, suspects your involvement behind multiple anonymous pieces. He's not present to condemn you. He wants to assist you. Don't believe him. Not immediately, but you permit him to continue. He proposes column allocation, a consistent feature. He'll challenge the editors for it. His single requirement: don't moderate it. Don't compose what you believe the men desire to hear. Compose what they need to comprehend. That evening, you sit in your modest room above the bookbinders, examining the empty page. This occasion there's no pseudonym, no initials. You compose. We do not request your authorization to enter the space. We're already present, observing, documenting, constructing what you refuse to envision. It publishes the subsequent Tuesday. By midday, it's been extracted and displayed on 6 entrances, recited aloud in 2 societies, condemned in 3 additional. You attach it to the assembly partition underneath the initial floorboards column. Someone includes a notation in the edge, not a murmur, a foundation, and that's what you're constructing presently. Not a demonstration, not an appeal. A location where women exist, not invited, not inherited, but created. The correspondence arrives without a sender address, secured in thick wax, the shade of dried blood within. Not a danger, but a caution. Mind what you publish. There are standings at risk. Women who articulate too forcefully often discover themselves discussed. You sit motionless, the paper quivering ever so faintly in your grasp. It's not the initial occasion. There have been murmurs, elevated eyebrows. One printer quietly ceased collaborating with the Herald after a particular article connected a member of Parliament to the obstruction of a widow's pension reform. Another shop assistant, intelligent, conversational, was terminated from her position days after attending the assembly. Nobody states it openly, but the regulations are. You can articulate if you're cautious, you can compose if you're courteous, you can exist publicly if you smile and remain gentle. But authority that is loaned is borrowed authority, always on the edge of being withdrawn. You transport the correspondence to the assembly that week, but you don't reveal it. Instead, you alter the subject. Tonight's conversation isn't about balloting or compensation or schooling. It's about standing. You inquire, what occurs to a woman who is no longer favoured? The responses emerge quickly. She's labelled difficult. She's labelled dangerous. She's labelled insane. One woman states, she's labelled nothing whatsoever, just erased. You all acknowledge. You've observed it, how a woman is eliminated not through legislation, but through mockery, through gossip, through silence, with elevated hands and reduced voices. You've witnessed a woman's reputation destroyed beneath the term unfeminine before she's even been acknowledged. Someone discusses a friend, an educator accused of corrupting her students simply for reading a novel by a female author. Another shares about her sister, who established a boarding house and was reported to the church for indecent independence. A girl at the rear shares in a near whisper how she kissed another woman once and how rapidly her employment vanished. Her friends ceased calling, and her identity was omitted from the parish roster the following Sunday. These are not courtroom trials. These are not police interventions. They're reputational executions, and they're frightening precisely because nobody acknowledges they're occurring. You begin collecting them quietly, meticulously. A record, not merely of identities, but of the terms used to destroy them. Shrill, spinster, unnatural, unmotherly, ambitious, impure. You inscribe them in ink, one below the other, and then adjacent to each, you inscribe the truth. Articulated clearly, remained unmarried by preference, loved genuinely, selected not to bear children, pursued occupation, defended herself. You don't release this roster. Not yet. Instead, you begin inserting small notations into the Herald side columns, smaller asides. When a woman's standing is questioned, inquire who profits from her silence. When a woman is labelled insane, inquire what truth she revealed. They're unsigned, but readers begin noticing. You start receiving extracted newspaper articles. In notes, the post, underlined phrases, circled terms. One envelope contains nothing but the term harpy, extracted from a gossip column and attached beside a photograph of a female speaker. You include it in the record. Another week, a message arrives folded inside a torn book covering. They claimed she was difficult. She claimed she was merely finished pretending to be insignificant. You attach that one above your workspace. Because here's the truth. Standing is merely another corset, invisible, structured with falsehoods, fastened by terror. And most dangerously of all, it's often secured by other women terrified of being loosened themselves. The whisper offensive begins exactly where you anticipate it would. At a tea establishment in a neighbourhood where the wallpaper costs more than your monthly payment. A friend informs you apologetically that she overheard a cluster of society women questioning your stability. That's the term they employ. Not credibility, not sanity, but that slippery, tilted term that floats like vapour and stains like ink. She's becoming terribly intense, one stated. Too invested. It can't be healthy for her nerves. Another added, I understand she composes all those dreadful anonymous articles. You smile faintly when you learn it. You've been anticipating this. Still it burns. The genuine danger of standing isn't merely public, it's relational. You start noticing distance expanding between you and former collaborators. Invitations evaporate. Editors require longer to respond. The bookseller who once provided discounts now avoids his gaze. Even some within the assembly shift uncomfortably. A few express worry about tone. One recommends retreating from political columns and concentrating more on uplifting narratives of feminine endurance. You listen. You acknowledge. But that evening you compose a fresh feature titled The Polite Silencing of Outspoken Women. And in the weeks following, something unanticipated occurs. You receive a package from an unfamiliar identity. Inside a weathered journal bound in fractured leather, a notation. This belonged to my grandmother. She maintained it concealed all her existence. I believe she would have appreciated what you're accomplishing. The journal is remarkable. Entry after entry, a woman, Sarah H., schoolmistress, 1842, details her attempts to instruct girls algebra and geography, despite being informed it would distort their natural instincts. She documents being demoted, being monitored, being dismissed eventually for utilising a map that included regions considered morally unsuitable. One entry states, "It is not that they fear what we instruct. It is that they fear what we permit others to envision." You duplicate that line, it becomes the fresh motto of the Herald's masthead. Soon others begin sharing their concealed histories. A laundress sends correspondence detailing how her mother was blacklisted from several employers after conversing with a factory inspector. A governess includes a fragment of paper from an old record where her identity was scratched out after she requested reading time for her pupils. These aren't dramatic narratives, they're small erasures, quiet punishments, and they are ubiquitous. So you determine it's time to make the roster public. The record of unnamed silencings, now dozens of pages extensive, is published as a special insertion in the Herald. Identities are redacted, dates are ambiguous, but the acts communicate loudly. Terminated after suggesting ventilation, labelled hysterical after refusing a suitor. Career concluded after correcting a male colleague's error. The opposition is immediate. One publication accuses you of fabricating tragedies. Another labels the insertion a fantasy of female grievance. A columnist composes, "If women are being silenced, they seem to be proclaiming about it adequately." You attach that statement on the assembly partition, right beside Sarah H's line. But quietly, your readership multiplies. Libraries begin requesting duplicates of the record. A printer in Manchester proposes to produce an extra 500 for free. A midwife composes, "I've studied the roster twice. I'm on it 3 occasions." You start receiving correspondence addressed simply to the woman who publishes what shouldn't be stated. And late one night, as you prepare the following issue, a girl from the assembly provides you a notation. It's brief, just one sentence. They can't incinerate a library they don't know survives. You acknowledge, because that's exactly what you're constructing. Not merely a publication, an archive, a sanctuary of silenced truths, and this occasion you'll ensure they resonate. It begins with a creak, a slow, intentional sound from the steps beyond the assembly space. Too heavy for the usual click of a lady's shoe, too slow for comfort. You freeze mid-sentence, chalk hovering just above the blackboard, the term voice half inscribed. Then a knock. 3 dull thuds on the aged oak entrance. A chill ripples through the space. The 20 women assembled there, perfectly still, fingers clutching paper, pens, buttons on coats. One of them gently positions down a teacup with a soft clink, like a prelude to something louder. You open the entrance. A man stands there in a rigid brown coat with an envelope in hand. Government seal, thick wax, the kind that doesn't travel by accident. "I was instructed to deliver this in person," he states, looking past you. He doesn't enter, he doesn't need to. Inside that envelope, a notification, the assembly is to be reviewed. Its permit as a public meeting location is under reconsideration. The reason? Unregulated distribution of published material, potentially disruptive to public order. You recite the terms aloud. Nobody speaks. You recall something your grandmother once stated while stitching up a worn hem. They don't fracture your voice. They unthread your location to employ it. The assembly has no formal leadership, but somehow everyone observes you. And just like that, you realise the government may not be arresting you, but it is pressing its thumb against your pulse. The following few days feel like walking through wet wool. You visit your printer. He hesitates, then informs you kindly, awkwardly, he can't produce the following issue. His lease is under review. A coincidence, he assures you. But the stack of half-finished pages on his workspace say otherwise. The tea establishment won't permit you to utilise the back room anymore. One by one, entrances that used to open with a smile now open halfway, so you adjust. You relocate the assembly to a rotating roster of private residences. 1 week in a seamstress's parlour, the following in a laundress's attic, each location inscribed onto slips of paper. Passed manually, incinerated after a reading. You feel like you've stepped into a spy novel. But instead of blueprints and codes, you're transporting poems, testimonies, correspondence from miners' wives and midwives and milliners. They arrive folded into petticoats, concealed beneath pies, hidden in lace sample books. You start publishing the Herald Underground again, literally. An aged cellar beneath a bakery, dampened to darkness and smelling faintly of yeast. The press requires 3 women to operate presently, 1 to crank, 1 to align, 1 to blot the pages with sand and suspend them to dry along clotheslines rigged between rafters. And still the terms arrive, still the correspondence pours in. Still you publish. One issue displays a diagram of a corset adjacent to an editorial titled "The Subtle Boning of Language." Another features a narrative about a maid terminated for stating no to her employer's son, titled simply "The Echo That Didn't Apologise." By this point you've ceased requesting for authorization. You've started requesting only one thing. What else are they attempting to maintain quiet? Because that's the matter about attempting to silence women. It instructs them how to articulate more creatively. The basement publishing operation becomes your sanctuary. It's dim and frigid, and you can never quite scrub the scent of yeast from your cuffs. But it's yours. The hiss of the press, the rhythmic crank of the lever, the soft clap of damp pages onto the drying lines. All of it has become a kind of lullaby. This is where your voice exists presently. Not in parlours or platforms or salons, but between rafters and shadows in the damp breath of paper inked with matters nobody else dares to publish. Each issue of the Herald presently displays no masthead. The pages are simply inserted, folded, so the border peeks out like a whispered caution. Distribution occurs hand-to-hand through verbal communication and market baskets and the quiet rustle of coat pockets on rain-drenched mornings. And yet they're reading it. A washerwoman in Leeds sends you a notation. My daughter recited me the fresh issue by firelight. We wept. Then we composed our own. A postmistress sends an envelope packed tight with correspondence, 16 of them assembled from her village. A housemaid composes, I position my duplicate inside the Lord's library, right under his duplicate of the Times. The Herald has become something beyond a publication. It's a signal, a reflection, a quiet resistance in the fractures between the empire's marble tiles. Naturally, they attempt to halt it. 1 week, the bakery above the publishing operation is raided. They claim it's for tax evasion, but they don't seize the cash register, they seize the cellar key. You're notified just in time to smuggle out the press plates and scatter the drying pages into a coal bin. That evening, you and 3 others drag the press uphill under moonlight. It requires 4 hours. The press is wrapped in flour sacks, the pages stuffed inside a bread basket. Your hands bleed from the iron handles, but you don't halt, because this isn't merely publishing anymore, it's survival. You resettle in an aged greenhouse behind a doctor's residence. He proposes it quietly, states his wife reads your publication and has been angrier in the finest way. There's ivy crawling through the windows and the floor is soft with moss, but the glass ceiling means sunlight for drying. You label it the ink house and still the narratives arrive. One correspondence includes a hair ribbon, another a lock of hair, and a notation. They shaved my head in the asylum, but they couldn't seize this. Please maintain it safe. A widow sends a poem folded into a handkerchief. I buried my spouse, then I buried my identity, but presently I unearth it. You begin archiving them, not in cupboards or folders, but in a massive quilt stitched from cast-off dresses. Each patch is embroidered with a line, a date, An anonymous voice. It's a tapestry of everything they attempted to erase. You suspend it in the ink house above the press, a banner, a shrine. And one night, just as dust settles, a girl no older than 14 slips through the greenhouse entrance. She's soaked from the rain, curls plastered to her forehead, shoes muddy. She hands you a folded fragment. It states, "I can't compose yet, but I remember everything, and I will state it all one day." You kneel, seize her hand, and press it against the quilt. "This," you whisper, "is where your voice will wait for you." Beyond. The storm rolls on. Within, the press rotates once more. You don't intend to articulate at the tribunal. Nobody does. The assembly agrees it's too hazardous, too public, too likely to be distorted in the publications. But then the correspondence arrives, an official summons, your identity inked in careful cursive, enclosed in a heavy cream envelope with a faint scent of lavender. It's almost refined until you study the fine print. You are being summoned to appear before a local magistrate board in relation to unauthorized publication, improper civic influence, and suspicion of coordinating unregistered assemblies. No reference of the Herald by identity, no direct accusation, just the same legal fog they perpetually employ, ambiguous, frigid, and heavy enough to suffocate you. Consider disregarding it. But the following morning, a woman you've never encountered knocks on your entrance. She wears no hat, no gloves, merely a linen apron and a trembling smile. "My sister's on the roster," she states, holding up a duplicate of the pages. "She died 3 years ago, but she'd desire you to proceed." So you proceed. The courthouse smells like rain and damp wood. You sit alone in a high-backed chair as 3 magistrates settle behind a lengthy oak table. They don't greet you. They don't acknowledge your gaze. "Are you," one begins, "familiar with a periodical known as the Herald?" You blink slowly. There are numerous publications by that identity. "Are you aware," another interjects, "that your identity appears in correspondence linked to unsanctioned publishing activity?" You tilt your head. "I correspond with numerous people. They proceed in circles, posing the same inquiry 10 different ways." "Are you responsible for the seditious content? Did you organize the readings?" "Are you aware of how these terms, these narratives, are affecting the social order?" You respond calmly, softly, every term chosen like a stone in a mosaic. "My occupation," you state, "amplifies what already survives. If there is disruption, perhaps you ought to consider what was so fragile to begin with." Silence. The youngest magistrate, no older than 30, face sharp with pride, leans forward. "Do you deny the charge of inciting moral unrest?" And here, something inside you exhales. You sit up straighter. You articulate clearly. "I don't deny it. I document it." A pause. Then another envelope is produced, this one thinner, a duplicate of a poem published in last month's pages. The magistrate recites it aloud. She articulated and the house trembled, not from her voice but from the walls, remembering what they were constructed to contain. He finishes and frowns. What does that signify? You almost smile. It signifies that a woman with a voice is never alone in the space. She brings every silence that ever attempted to swallow her. They do not appreciate that. You're dismissed with a caution. Cease all association with underground publications or face further inquiry. You walk out of the courthouse into a grey afternoon, heart thudding, the weight of centuries pressing on your ribs. But there's a girl waiting on the steps. She appears nervous, barely 16. She presses something into your hand. A folded fragment, border visible. You open it. It states, "Continue forward. We're louder than they believe." You don't weep, not in front of the girl, not on the stone steps, not in the street. You acknowledge, tuck the bordered fragment into your coat and walk away with steady feet and soaked hems. But later that evening, back in the ink house, the tears finally arrive. Not because you're terrified, but because you finally feel the weight of just how many are observing, listening, waiting. You reflect back to the beginning, to the parlour where you whispered your initial lines onto cheap paper, to the corset establishment where tokens changed hands under bolts of fabric, to the moment you dared to compose something other than a recipe or a prayer. And presently you sit beneath a roof of glass, surrounded by stacks of correspondence with the storm tapping at the panes, and you wonder, was it ever genuinely about articulating aloud, or was it about refusing to be quiet? You don't publish the following issue of the Herald not in print. Instead, you rotate to something older, oral history. You invite 12 women to the ink house and request them to bring nothing but memory. They sit in a circle of mismatched chairs, hands folded over knees, eyes wide with uncertainty. You begin with a simple prompt. Inform me the moment you understood you were not permitted to be yourself, and the narratives tumble out like thread from a spindle. A widow recalls being forbidden to learn numbers. A seamstress confesses she's never once consumed at the same table as her employer. A midwife shares about a stillbirth she was blamed for, though the doctor had arrived too late. Each woman articulates. Each narrative is folded into the following, like waves reshaping a shoreline. You inscribe none of it down. Instead, the subsequent week you host another assembly, then another, and soon they begin sharing the narratives to each other, not merely to you. One night, a young maid recites a tale that was shared 5 circles ago, verbatim, term for term. She didn't inscribe it. She listened, she held it, she remembered, she gave it away. It became the newspaper with no newsprint, the forbidden records with no pages, the uprising with no press. You begin naming them whisper circles, and they move from the print house to dining rooms and playgrounds, to seamstresses, markets and factory floors. Sometimes it's 3 women beneath an overpass. Sometimes it's 2 in a narrow passage, trading words like stolen goods. One woman opens each circle by rising and declaring, "You are not by yourself. You carry the voices of those who walked before and those still waiting to speak." And they echo it back like an oath. Days pass, and a young girl, maybe 10, maybe 12, hands you a folded sheet at the marketplace. You're ready to object, to warn her against the danger, but she grins with certainty, and that grin tells you, it's different than you expect. You open it. It's an illustration. 12 women, palms linked, one wearing a crown woven from petals, one with a band across her mouth, one caught laughing, one weeping, and below it, written in red wax crayon, "The circle will not shatter." You fold it gently, tuck it into your coat, and continue walking, understanding the newspaper exists not in print, but in souls. The avenues are buzzing with whispers now, not concerning government or royalty or battles, but concerning women, concerning meetings, concerning a different kind of truth, delivered in circles not stamped in type. Some call it sorcery, others kindness. But nobody appears to understand precisely who began it or how it multiplies, and that's precisely the intention. You move through the marketplace and catch it in fragments. 2 women at the seafood counter murmuring about the one who mentioned the forbidden archive. A washerwoman mumbling something concerning dried herbs and recollection. The tales are twisting and transforming like melodies handed down through cradle songs. You no longer guide every meeting. You don't have to. The whisper circles have grown roots, separate and immovable. One afternoon a message comes by carrier bird. Yes, an honest carrier bird. It descends on your windowsill with the elegance of a grimy messenger, and fastened to its foot is a tiny parchment. It says, "We've begun one in Manchester. Factory workers, spouses primarily. We open each circle by sharing a cooking instruction, just to be safe if anyone's eavesdropping. But we always finish in honesty." You grin and return a response on that same scrap of parchment. Honesty makes an excellent final course. During this time, something curious starts occurring in the open. A politician stands on a streetcar seat and performs a cradle song that concludes with, "She was never permitted to talk, so she hummed." A dressmaker leaves behind a garment template that, when creased precisely right, shows a verse stitched into the interior. At the pharmacy, someone passes you a match container. Within is a small piece of cloth embroidered in crimson thread. She desired employment. They presented her with marriage. You begin gathering these objects, not in a collection hall, but in a travelling case and an aged leather container with oxidized fastenings and split grips. You name it the collection. Within, fasteners, pieces of trim, shopping notes with hidden verses, kerchiefs with stain marks that show words when warmed. The travelling case becomes weightier still, not from mass, but from significance, because each object is a denial. A denial to erase, a denial to surrender, a denial to vanish. And it starts to attract notice, initially only interested looks, then murmurs. And then one daybreak an officer halts you on the avenue. He's courteous. Excessively courteous. "Lady," he states, "we've learned about a travelling case." You act confused. "A travelling case," he continues, "with materials connected to rebellious thinking." You stare, angle your head. "I transport only what's been abandoned." He grins thinly. All the more cause to examine it. You pass it over carefully. He unseals it. And within, aged cloths, fragments of parchment, blackened borders, bands, fasteners, worthless to most, holy to you. He searches through it, stops at a verse stitched into the border of an infant's cap. Then, for causes you'll never fully comprehend, he shuts the cover, passes it back, and states, "Watch where you drop your threads." Some of us are beginning to notice the design. Then he departs. That evening you remain with the travelling case open on your knees, not as a gatherer, but as a keeper of defiance. Each object within contains a tale no legal record could hold. A beverage-stained piece of parchment says, "Instructed to stitch, not to talk." A piece of trim coming apart at one edge shows the dim trace of a name, one you recall from the forbidden records. A kerchief carries faintly of purple flowers and cinders. You don't weep, not these days, but you sense the pain settle low in your back, the kind of pain that informs you the past is moving gradually, obstinately, like a cartwheel trapped in the clay. The collection transforms into more than a travelling case. It transforms into a dialect. At the following whisper circle, you spread out the items in the middle of the space. Nobody talks initially. Then one woman lifts a worn glove and murmurs. This brings to mind the set my sister abandoned before she boarded the train to Leeds. She never returned. Another raises a cylinder of thread. My elder used to conceal names within her needlework. And one by one, the women start creating tales from objects. No type, no parchment, just thread and recollection. Before long, others contribute their own offerings. A ripped undergarment cord, a blackened account book, a youth's band, with not yours, scratched in tallow. And you grasp, this is how women speak the truth in a reality that declines to hear it. They stitch it, conceal it, transport it in clear view. One daybreak, you discover a soft pouch on your threshold within a pin. Initially it appears common, but when you release the fastening, creased within is a message she moved with an injured foot instead of losing a single hour of liberty. It's without signature. You place it in the collection. And then one dusk, a woman taps on your entrance. She displays a municipal clerk's attire, pressed neckline, practical footwear. "I don't have time," she states. "They don't realise I'm present." You gesture, permit her entrance. She doesn't settle. She unseals her bag and extracts a bundle covered in waxed fabric. "This," she states, "was discovered in a destroyed boarding house in Whitechapel. We believe it's connected to your collection." You unwrap it gradually. It's a youth's writing board, still faintly heated from the blaze, carved into its face with what appears like a stitching needle. We are beyond the tales they permit us to preserve. You trace your digits across the words. Burned, diminished, but not eliminated. Never eliminated, because this is the instant you grasp something unbreakable. They can prohibit the volumes, seal the markets, destroy the buildings. But they cannot prohibit recollection. They cannot quiet what has already been voiced. They cannot follow every thread you've hidden into the border of the reality. And so you compose no fresh edition of the newspaper that period. Instead, you plant and you pause, because you understand the following tale will not come by mail. It will come covered in material, stitched into a neckline, or murmured by a stranger who recognizes your identity but never voices it openly. The collection is breathing, and so are you. You don't arrange the closing meeting. It starts on its own, like an inhale drawn before sunrise. Information moves through market stands and washing lines, through powder marks on yard barriers and hidden phrases hidden within broth instructions. The communication is apparent, one final circle. Contribute nothing but what you cannot voice openly. You don't understand who initiated it, but you identify the pulse. It's the identical rhythm that transported the forbidden records, the identical hush that tracked the travelling case through passages and sitting room levels. It's the pulse of every prohibited word that declined to perish. By twilight they arrive one by one, in sheepcoats and marked footwear, with hollow containers and complete recollections. You gather not in a residence, but in a meadow behind the weaver's factory. The heavens are the shade of aged writing material. The atmosphere carries of soil and metal. They shape a circle, 50 women, perhaps more. You quit tallying. Nobody talks initially. Then a youth, hardly 16, moves forward. She transports a looking-glass, tiny, fractured at the borders. She raises it without a word and angles it toward the heavens. It captures the diminishing brightness, spreading it across the circle. You comprehend. Each woman moves forward with something. An elder's waist fastening, a preserved bloom pressed between devotion sheets, a message carved into the lower side of a shoe's base. And the tales arrive not as single voices, but as whispers, interwoven, crossing, a harmony of missing allowances and soft rebellions. You settle and hear to the one who cared for a perishing youth while prohibited to voice her identity, to the one who instructed symbols in hiding to servants, using sweetener on the planks, to the one who declined to surrender her earnings to a spouse she hadn't selected. The blaze they've constructed in the middle flickers tall, then short, then tall once more. Someone casts in a corset support. It crackles as it ignites. Another throws in a crimson band, the precise shade once displayed by the youth who passed you your initial communication in the plaza. You still recall the shake in her palm. The tales thicken the atmosphere. You can nearly sense them, like type and brine and timber smoke. And then you're past something. A cap, simple pale, creased carefully within, stitched into the interior, are 4 words. She never remained quiet. You press it to your torso, and in that instant you understand the circle is concluding. Not because the struggle is finished, but because the voices no longer require concealing. The tales will endure, not in hidden spaces or hidden messages, but in how women start to move differently, taller, bolder. You glance around. Many you recognize, many you don't. But all are known. They gesture to one another. Some are weeping. Some are grinning. One is laughing. The kind of laugh that's been holding years to break free. And without requiring to decide, the circle shuts. Not in quiet, but in melody. A soft, humming cradle song handed from parent to youth across generations. A melody once employed to silence, now employed to rouse. You hum too, and observe the blaze pop its final. The blaze perishes gradually, as if unwilling to abandon the presence of so many unspoken tales. Cinders float through the meadow like pale celebration pieces, landing on wraps, lashes, the ends of marked footwear. Nobody removes it away. It pertains to all of you currently. Portion of the recollection, portion of the releasing. One by one, the women start to stand. There are no addresses, no announcements, just the soft ritual of leaving, palms pressed, glances maintained, heads lowered, not in disgrace, but in respect. You observe them disappear into the twilight, silhouettes moving through bushes, into vehicles, down stone paths. Some transport nothing, some transport everything. And then you are solitary. You remain by the glowing remains and consider all the things Victorian women were not permitted to do. They couldn't cast ballots. They couldn't possess their own flesh. They couldn't refuse and be trusted. They couldn't ascend, talk, sprint, guide, yell, release, receive, pause, or travel solitary after darkness. But observe what they accomplished regardless. They delivered communications through creased washing. They charted cities with powder. They constructed archives of recollection in the joints of garments and the borders of blankets. They employed sweetener to instruct symbols, quiet to talk stronger than preaching. And you were one of them.